Good afternoon and good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Warrant Committee. Karen, could you call the roll?
Sure. We have Tom Caldwell, Lori Connolly, Elizabeth Dillon, Jay Fundling, Peter Mon, Julia Maxwell on Zoom, Brian McGuire, and on Zoom we have Aman Nagasi, Ronald Sia, and Judy Steele. You have the quorum.
Okay, so I'll call this meeting to order. Welcome, everyone, Warrant Committee members and members of the public. Happy New Year, belated New Year to everyone. So we are beginning our meeting concerning the upcoming February special town meeting. As you've all seen from some of the information I've shared, we have a draft warrant for consideration. There are several articles that were brought forth by the select board. And just to note, there are also, and can speak to the town administrator about this a little bit, but there are some other articles that are not on this current draft warrant that are still being considered by the select board. So as we stand now and was submitted to you and what we're going to review this evening is everything that's been approved by the select board. We could see a few more things coming down the pike. And I'll hopefully have more information about those in the upcoming days or week as the select board figures out if there's anything more they want us to consider and then town meeting. So tonight we have our town administrator, Nick Milano, as I indicated. He's going to be presenting some information for us on the draft warrant. He will also be available to answer some questions about the upcoming fiscal year budget. And then I'll be addressing, as it indicates in the agenda, some of our future meetings to address and comment on the articles that are before us for town meeting. So all that being said, I invite Town Administrator Ms. Milano to the microphone.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Milano. So, Ms. Milano, you and I had spoken in preparing for the meeting tonight, and as you know, on the agenda we have some budget updates, and then also we have the discussion with the special town meeting articles. So, I give the floor to you, sir. I don't know, maybe it might be more appropriate right now to just maybe address the articles, and I would guess maybe we'll go article by article, maybe do questions after each, if there are any from the committee, and then just move on to the next.
Sure, that works for me.
And if there are any budget questions after the presentation on the warrant, maybe we could talk to those, or if maybe there are questions concerning these articles that may affect the budget upcoming, maybe we kind of intertwine the conversation with both topics. So, all that being said, sir,
I'll share the warrant, if that's okay with you.
Of course.
On my screen. So I'll go in order that's in the draft warrant that we distributed. So we have a number of articles that have been approved by the select board for inclusion. A few more were added last night by the select board, and then as Chair noted, there are a few still kind of being worked on by a couple of boards, primarily the planning board, as it relates to two articles rather. So the first article that we have approved for the warrant is an appropriation from the Peg Access Enterprise Fund of $50,000 to equip the meeting room in the old fire headquarters to be able to be used as a place to broadcast live meetings. So that building was the former fire headquarters. It was renovated as part of the fire headquarters project. The meeting room is fully built out, but that project did not include outfitting it for live broadcasts. The ultimate goal of this project would be to have replace this room as a primary meeting space with a beautiful new meeting room that has windows and a view to the outside. It's spacious, and so ultimately it'll be able to support Milton TV's efforts, as well as be much more conducive for regular boards and committees to host hybrid meetings if they so chose. So we have cameras that we can use that would facilitate, a board or committee that doesn't have a Milton TV support to have a hybrid meeting. But primarily the work will be about enabling their work to host warrant committee, planning board, or the other televised boards and committees. So the way the PEG Access Enterprise Fund appropriation would work is the money would be appropriated out of the enterprise fund and transferred to Milton TV as we do every year for their operating and capital budgets. It would just be treated as another expense for them, a capital expense and a capital project for Milton TV to undertake to outfit that room. And just for further background, I know some folks are familiar with this and some aren't. So if you get a cable license to operate a cable company in Milton, the two that we have now are Comcast and RCN. On your own bill, there is a public educational and government fee. That fee comes to the town of Milton. We have an agreement with MPEG Access Inc., which is Milton TV, to transfer most of that fee on an annual basis for their operating and capital expenses, but it's not the full amount. So there's an additional amount that stays with the town, which is where we're recommending this appropriation come out of. So there's about $420,000 in that fund presently, and we're recommending an appropriation of $60,000 of that over to Milton TV for outfitting that room. I think that's kind of the lay of the land on that. And for this, and as with any of the articles, as I'm here to provide kind of the summary and the background, if there's additional information that would be helpful to your conversation and discussion, obviously myself, or we're lucky Shane's here, whether he's available to answer questions, but he is here. He or I would be able to get back to you with further information if needed.
Could we take some questions?
Sure.
Sorry.
So was that money originally intended for something else? Is something going to get?
No,
what
it's
are we timing for this?
so it's part of the fee paid to the town, but our agreement with Milton TV doesn't say you get 100% of all the revenue. It says you get most of the revenue, but all of it, the town retains some of it to be used for purposes. It's been previously appropriated for the broadband fiber network that the town is building between its facilities. So it can be used as long as it's supporting public educational and governmental broadcasting and networking.
So there's 420 in there now.
Correct.
Take out 60. What's the other 364?
To be appropriated. It could support, say, Milton TV said, hey, we want to do a project to upgrade cameras. Hey, town, will you give us additional funding to do that? That's a potential resource. It's restricted to quote unquote PEG purposes.
Gotcha.
Did the build out take into account the fact that Milton TV would be using that space?
Not necessarily originally, but it's like drop ceilings. It's before it was built out, there was conversations to say, hey, this is what we kind of need so we can come in after the fact and do what we need to do. Sure.
This pays for I'm just going to say,
Oh,
you
absolutely.
called on me because you did. So this pays for both the build out of the room and then also the equipment, or just the infrastructure? I would assume it would pay for both, but I don't know. The equipment that's needed?
Yeah, installation and the equipment that's needed.
Okay. And then my second question is, and then that room would still be able to be used really for any public meeting. So for our committee, the select board, whatever, any group that would normally be able to use like this room.
Correct. The limitation that we face is with the boards or committees that they televise.
Right.
They need special equipment for
Sure.
that. So if that room is being used for the planning board and the warrant committee, maybe Thursday nights and Mondays and Wednesdays might be tough, but otherwise it'll be available just as this room is.
So the idea is just to increase available
Meeting space. Yep.
and for them to be able to televise.
Correct.
Okay.
And it functions today as a meeting room. It's being used. I know the Climate Action Planning Committee meets. We've had trainings in there. And it can be used for hybrid meetings. And it's set up for that. We have a screen in there, but this will just make it much more user-friendly. We're bringing over equipment when we need to on a regular basis now.
Lori?
Nick, will this allow, I think there's an issue with like staff. So could we have two boards, one here, one there, and have MATV supporting us? Or does it not give us that flexibility?
We have 2 meetings going live tonight, school
you
committee
do?
and warrant
Okay.
committee, but we do try to avoid that because of manpower
Well,
constraints.
that's,
And that would still be the case, and unless,
so
yeah.
it's not like we're gonna get like, oh, every night we could have 2 meetings. Or we would not want to have 2 meetings that required MATV,
Correct.
I'm assuming.
We still try to avoid conflicts where possible.
Right.
Same.
3 meetings.
We have Julia on Zoom. Lori,
I just lowered my hand. I think my question was answered, but I'll just confirm. So with this 60 grand, Nick, they would be, this is what is needed to be up and running and operating. There's nothing additional that would be needed at this point.
That is correct.
Thank you.
thank you, Julia. Lori,
And is the room on the first floor or the second floor?
It's on the first floor. So the project included demo and renovation of the first floor, and then abatement and demo of the second floor and the third floor. We have not taken any real meaningful steps on what to do with the second and third floor. It only has one means of egress. It doesn't have an elevator, so there's complications with building that space out for public access. And there are a couple of other capital projects before us at the moment.
if I could, Nick, I know you had described just some of like the tech. So essentially, it's simply technical equipment that's the money's being used for.
Correct.
Okay, and it's everything that we really have outfitted in every room that we have these meetings. So it's cameras
And microphones and the software and technology that goes along with it. The room is outfitted today. It's got, furniture, it has TV, it has that stuff to facilitate meetings today, but it doesn't have everything it needs to facilitate the live televised meetings.
So the 60,000, and I'm I don't mean to beat it, but the 60,000 is really is the final step in having this thing fully operational.
Right.
Okay.
Yes, sorry.
Oh.
So just one quick question. So over what amount of time did we gather this $420,000? And what is the lifespan of this equipment? Like, how long do these things last and we'd have to replace them? And then how long would it take to generate this amount of money again? Maybe you don't
It's a
know.
good question because I'll answer the first part of it first, and I'll defer to Shane if he has a moment to answer the second part of that. So the good thing is this has been a reliable source of revenue for the town. The bad thing is I'm sure folks around this table know and online that not everybody gets cables anymore.
No.
And Verizon, for example, came into town, built out a fiber network, and is not offering cable, is only offering internet. So they don't have to sign an agreement or pay fees because they're not offering cable. It's a cable license. And so over the long term, as cord cutting continues, unless changes happen at the FCC or locally, this is a slowly declining revenue stream or a less reliable revenue stream. So there will need to be big picture conversations about ensuring that Milton TV has funding in place for the long term. In terms of this funding, I'm just looking at a table showing in fiscal 17, there's $420,000 in there. It grew over time over the last few years. About $388,000 was appropriated out for the broadband related projects. So it had grown to, I think at its peak was about $740,000 and has kind of come back down. And then over the past couple of years, it's been building back up. So it was 367 at the close of fiscal 23, and it's up to 420 now. So
So year over year, it's like
30,000.
30,000.
Yeah.
Okay. So the amount that we're seeking to appropriate is about roughly 2-ish years.
Yeah, with
remember.
the acknowledgement that
It might be less.
it might be less as
Okay.
the fee revenue declines as fewer people necessarily have cable. And then Shane, there was a question about lifespan of the equipment and replacement thereof.
Hi. Chose the right meeting to work today.
If you could just introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Shane Brandenburg, Executive Director of Milton Access Television. That was a longevity question, yes.
Yes.
Usually 10 to 15 years. It depends. We did this build out in this room in 2021, so we're approaching about 4 years here. I would say with the way technology's going, sometimes something comes up and maybe it's 5 years, maybe it's 15 years. I would say I've been with the company for 13 years now. So we went complete rebuild out of this room in 2021. So within that 10, but the equipment in this room was installed in like 2008, I want to say. So the major upgrade was 13 years later. So we project 10 to 15 year lifespan on this. And just one thing, the meeting room will be a dual use. In other words, there will be 2 tracking cameras. So any board that meets that we don't necessarily cover, it'll be a completely automated system that they can just turn it on and the cameras will follow them and they'll do the Zoom and we don't have to be there. And we can get the recording if someone wants it for later. Meetings that we do record and cover, it'll be 2 staff members just like this evening, same setup type of thing. And we'll have a 3rd camera when it's a live broadcast, so we'll actually have an additional camera so we can actually move it around and do other stuff.
Okay, anyone have any follow-ups to that? Okay, Shane, thank you very much.
No problem.
Appreciate it.
Thank you. All right, so I'll move on to the next article. In my packet, I have, this is the home rule petition related to additional liquor licenses. So I'll give a little bit of background information as to how we arrived at this proposal. All right. So I won't go too in the weeds on this, but I'll just state that Mass General Law strictly controls liquor licenses. There are 2 types of licenses, just in kind of high-level terms. One for on-premises consumption, which is restaurants. The other is, they say, off-premises consumption, which is package stores. Generally, there are 3 ways communities are categorized based on whether they can issue liquor licenses. So the legislature says whether cities and towns can issue liquor licenses. There is a quota system in place for most communities that says, based on population, you have 15 licenses for on-premises consumption and 6 licenses for off-premises consumption. That's most communities. There are a number of communities that in the 1980s opted out of the quota system when that was a possible option. And then that's a smaller number. And then there's a few towns, and Milton is one of them, that had voted against allowing sale of one or both kinds of licenses back in the 60s and 70s. So Milton voted not to allow the sale of alcohol for on-premises consumption, but voted yes to allowing the sale of alcohol for off-premises consumption. So that is the parameters that we're living in today. And the licenses are, the quota set maximum on the maximum number of licenses that you can issue. So Milton has a quota for off-premises consumption of 6. For on-premises consumption, technically, we have 0 licenses allowed. But as we all know, there are restaurants in Milton that do have liquor licenses. So this is a little background on, if we were in the quota system, we'd have up to 30 potential licenses. Milton would be allowed up to 19, and cities and towns are allowed up to 30. So with the 2 processes, what does that look like? So for an off-premises or a package store license, to get a license, you need to apply to the local licensing authority, which is the select board in towns. And then if you get local approval from the local licensing authority, you also need approval of the Alcohol Beverages Control Commission, the ABCC. And that's it. As long as your business meets zoning, you confirm you meet zoning requirements for a package store, you apply to the licensing board, and then you get confirmed by the ABCC, and you can have a license. Pretty straightforward. For a restaurant, because we don't have any on-premises license under the law, the select board is not allowed to just issue them. So we need a pretty convoluted process. So you have to get on a town meeting warrant for a home rule petition. That has to come to this committee. The select board has to sponsor it, comes to this committee. then it goes to town meeting. So you need town meeting approval of the home rule petition. Then the home rule petition goes to the legislature, and then the legislature has to have a committee hearing on it, and both branches have to approve it, and the governor has to sign it. Then the license is now, the select board now has a license to give out. So now the applicant has to apply to the select board, receive approval, apply to the ABCC, and then assuming they've met permitting and everything else, they can have their license and operate their business. So it's a lengthy process. The most recent time that this has happened is for a potential project at 1 Elliott Street, which is where Rebuilt is. JD Wild is the owner there. So he came to the May of 2022 annual town meeting for a liquor license, and that was approved at the end of the session in 2024. So two very distinct paths, because in one category we have 6 licenses for off-premises, and the other category we have 0. So this is just kind of a summary of what we have. So there's 4 package store licenses presently available. And then this gives a history of our special act. They're called special act licenses because they require a special act of the legislature. The first one was Madre, and its precursor restaurant, which had a different name. That's on 88 Wharf at Milton Landing. The most recent one, as I mentioned, was 1 Elliott Street, and it was at the 2022 March special town meeting that they applied for the license, and it wasn't until October 2024 where the license was approved by the legislature. Now that's an outlier in terms of how long it took, and in that case, the project wasn't really moving forward anyway, so that didn't delay the project. But as you can see, there are other examples of some that moved a little bit more quickly and some that took a long time. So if you're interested in opening a restaurant in Milton, you have a location in the business district that a restaurant is allowed use, the first thing you need to do is come talk to the select board about getting a warrant article to then go through a 2-year process to have approval for a liquor license. So what we were trying to do in creating this home rule petition is say, this process is a little convoluted. It's a little daunting for anybody looking to open a restaurant. We've had commercial spaces that people had talked about might potentially be restaurants, that it's just a long time horizon to have that certainty that you might be able to offer alcohol sales. So what we've proposed to do is the home rule petition in your packet, and I'll just stop sharing that screen there. And what we're asking the legislature to do is to grant the town 5 licenses so that the select board will have them. And that if a business comes forward, then we won't have to say, okay, go to town meeting, we'll see you in 2 years. We can say, all right, here's how you apply for the license. You have your public hearing, we make sure you have zoning approval, and we'll go from there. So it's just, the idea is to facilitate that process more smoothly. Today, there's not necessarily anybody in mind, but it's more about preparing for an opportunity to make that life of future small business a little bit easier here in town. So that's the proposal, and I'm happy to take any questions on that.
I have a question. I think you said it, but I don't understand. Why wouldn't Milton be under the quota system like every other town?
That's because of the result. So the way Chapter 138, when they instituted at some point, they said, we'll put this question on 3 successive state elections. If you vote no 3 times in a row, then you're out. So Milton voted no to on-premises sales in 3 successive state elections. So it exercised an option to not allow these sales. Conversely, it voted yes for the off-premises sales at those 3 state elections.
I mean, would it be easier to try to get the state to change the law, or is that just a process?
So
Convoluted.
it's it's more, I think something like that. What I would suggest would be nice if they changed was to address issues like this, to say, hey, cities and towns, if you opted out, here's the process to put the question back in front of voters. Right. But even that avenue doesn't really exist. Mm-hmm. So that would be, a logical option, but it just doesn't exist. So there have been other communities that have done acts like this to get a certain amount of licenses, to put the question back in front of voters. And then often, like communities that have reached their cap will go to the legislature to say, can we have 2 more? And the legislature, sure, you can have 2 more. the city of Boston runs up against this problem, and they just got approval to add 250 over 5 years because they have the same issue where licenses cost $500,000, and local places in the outer Lang neighborhoods are selling them to downtown restaurants. So it's not a problem only in Milton, but this one's a little unique in of how we landed in this position.
That was my question, whether other people have done it. Thank you.
Sure.
So you said that under a quota system, we'd probably wind up with 19.
Yes.
Why 5? Is that what you're asking?
We are trying to get the ball rolling. It was kind of like, we don't want to ask for 19.
So nobody would say yes to 19, but
I don't think, yeah, it felt, and if we were sitting here today and said, all right, we're thinking, we've been approached by 3 restaurants that want to open, then, those would consume the first 3. Would that change? Perhaps, but since we don't have anything directly in mind, it felt, and the legislature could come back to Milton and say, hey, we know you filed this home rule petition for 5. We actually just only want to give you 2 right now. Like that is still a possible outcome, and the language in this would give the select board and the general court the authority to tweak that if necessary, and that's possible. And they might add other language, but primarily it was just kind of a starting point.
thank you.
Sure.
Ms. Milano, in terms of what you just indicated, like the legislature might come back and say, we're not really interested in giving you 5, we'll give you 2. Is that something that typically happens with these home rule petitions? Do they kind of back off, or do they just acquiesce usually to what the
feedback we've gotten is if the local legislative body approves something and the local legislators support it and advocate for it at the State House, it's usually pretty deferential on something like that. But there may be other things that they look for. And our special act licenses now, just so folks understand, they're tied to the address that they're granted for. So Madre's example, it's a license that is for 88 Wharf. And so if that restaurant closes, they return the license to the select board. The select board can reissue it at that location. The same thing with the plate at 10 Bassett Street. So that's closed. The license wasn't reissued to the plate. We expect an application from a potential future restaurant, but it's for the license for that location. So often that's the language they'll add to this. So that may be something that gets added as an example. Hard to say, but I think generally they're deferential. The liquor license stuff is a little tricky up there. So we wanted to get the ball rolling because this could take a little while to get through and work out some of the back and forth around that.
still?
So now it's kind of a per project application. Would it be kind of, if the select board were to have 5, and maybe you don't know and it would just have to be, we'd have to see. But if the select board were to have 5 in the bank to be able to award, would it be like kind of a first in time, first come, first serve situation? Would it be let's look at what areas don't already have restaurants? Would it be a meet the neighbors situation? Do we know? Or it's just like you applied first, fine, that looks good, hand that one out and then see how it goes.
Yeah, I think our approach at this point is it would be, since there isn't a business in mind
Sure.
or that has approached us.
Right.
So I think it's more about let's have them to respond.
Mm-hmm.
I think the restaurant use is only allowed in a business district in Milton.
Sure.
Business districts in Milton are pretty limited. So it's a fairly finite geographical area where these could go under current zoning. Obviously zoning can change, but under current zoning, it's a fairly limited area where that use would be allowed.
Ron?
Hi. Thanks for the explanation, Nick. Very helpful. I had 2 questions. First, do you know, and you may not know this, but has the town voted against any requests for a liquor license recently?
I don't know the history. To my knowledge, the requests that came to town meeting have all been successful, but I don't know the perfect answer on that one.
Okay, thanks. And then the second one, if hypothetically, if we get through these 5, let's say it gets voted in and we get through these 5, any subsequent requests, would it go back to the select board or would it go back to the town vote? So is this supposed to be 5 And all future requests should go through the select board, or would it be, these are 5 for the select board, everything else stays with the status quo? Just wondering which.
Right. So all this would grant the select board the authority to issue 5 additional licenses. If it does so, and a 6th was requested, we would either go back to town meeting for the old process, or we would go back to town meeting with a home rule petition to request an additional 5, additional 2. But after these 5 are used up, then it would be back to kind of either a home rule petition for a restaurant by restaurant case, or town goes back to the legislature and requests X additional licenses to keep it going.
Got it, understood, thank you.
Judy. Then Liz.
Thank you. Nick, so my question is, you mentioned the license more or less stays at the property, if you will, using 88 Wharf as an example. The current restaurant could change hands and become a different restaurant. What if a restaurant is no longer going to be there? What if the current restaurant closes, the space is taken over for a different kind of business? And now what happens to that liquor license that would have stayed at 88 Wall?
In that example, the special act does not allow transferring to a different address. They're at location specific. So if that were to be the case, and a redevelopment of that site were to happen and the restaurant goes away, the town would have a liquor license on its books that it can't issue to a different location.
Oh, so in essence, we lose a license.
Correct. And that was one of the factors why that language isn't included in our draft here, because of situations like that. A restaurant, it's a tough industry. We know they don't always succeed. So if it were to fail, we would have gone through all this work and have ended up losing the license itself. The language that we're proposing doesn't have that requirement for these 5 additional, but that language is in place for the existing licenses that are in Milton today.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Is there any cost associated with the town acquiring the licenses, like hard costs?
No, the applicants it's a $2,500 annual fee for all alcohol license.
And that would only apply once there were an applicant that was not the town, like an actual restaurant. Okay.
Yeah.
No, that was it. Thank you.
Ms. Milano, if I could just ask a couple of questions. So just kind of expanding on some of the other questions that were asked and some of your answers. So just I'll speak a little bit for the public too. So they're tied to the address, correct?
The existing ones are, as proposed today, that language is not in our home rule petition for these 5 additional, are not tied to the address as we've drafted it.
Yes, but if this were to, I should have been more articulate. If this were to pass and they were to be granted, they're tied to that address?
Not necessarily.
Not necessarily?
Yep.
Okay.
It could be, and that has been language that has been put into the other home rule petitions for the other ones that have been passed. But in kind of the example that Judy provided, we wanted to create a little more flexibility. Mm-hmm. But that's language that is in the others, not currently in our draft today.
Okay. Now, I guess if there's going to be a transfer, say if a business ends at that location, hypothetically, we never want to see this happen, but in 88 Wharf, they're like, we're kind of done with this. A new place comes in. What's the approval process?
Sure.
How's that new owner or company vetted?
So for all of our existing licenses, as well as for these potential licenses, it's treated as a new license. So it starts over with a new process. So in this case where I don't want to get too caught up in nuance, but if the LLC stays the same, but the ownership interest within the LLC, that's like a more of a procedural approval. But they have to come to the select board and go to the ABCC for that. If the restaurant closes down, returns the license to the select board, it has to be reissued as if it's a new license. So there's a public hearing involved. Abutter notifications are required. They have to provide floor plans. They have to provide information on who the investors are. They have to provide information on who the managers are. They have to provide information how they'll manage the place, how they'll train their staff. They have to respond to the public hearing and to the comments. It's kind of almost think of it like a special permit kind of process. The town has done so few of them that it's kind of an unfamiliar process. But yes, it's treated like a public hearing, a butter notifications. The select board can put limitations on the license in terms of hours, in terms of certain things to address potential concerns. But
So they can alter. They
Yep.
can, so if
Correct.
88 Wharf had wide open 24/7,
Right.
that's not the case, the select board can say no.
put certain limitations.
6 p.m. to 9 p.m.
Correct.
With something.
Yep.
So, and that's how it would apply to these 5 open licenses.
Correct. That's any process to get any alcohol license that's permanent. So any on-premises or off-premises requires that thorough vetting process locally, and then it goes to the ABCC for their review and their approval as well.
Their approval. So essentially, like we're kind of, and I'm not saying negative, but we're removing town meeting. We're kind of giving the select board the authority, with the processes,
Right.
with the town, with the abutters and everything. But
Correct.
the select board solely really kind of has the authority on the local level. Then it goes on to the AB. But
Yep.
the select board is going to be the one who's going to be checking the box. and
Correct.
say yes or no.
Yep.
So the Madre example, they decide to close, they turn back the license, a new investor comes in or new owner, opens a different, they get that license back automatically because,
Not on
but
it's
if they have to go through a process,
Yeah.
but
it's that license for that address that would be reissued. So it comes back to the town, doesn't go anywhere until we get a new application, go through a new process, approved locally, approved by the APCC, and then that license for that address gets issued back out to the new XYZ restaurant.
But there's a public hearing associated with that?
Yep.
And they can change the rules from what the license used to be
Sure.
to what it,
Yeah.
they
It's
want.
treated as a new
Brand-
entity.
Okay, thank you.
And that's, again, we'll see what happens with 10 Bassett Street, but we will go through that process for any potential restaurant that were to replace the plate. It had a liquor license, not really used as much as some of the others in town, but it did have one.
Right.
And there would be a similar process that would be required of the new applicant.
That's where I was going.
Sure.
Because it sounded like, whatever the plate had is automatically given to the new.
No, it's treated as a new, it requires the whole process.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. It should think of it as an address versus an entity.
Right. And the address doesn't have all the specifics of how it operates.
Correct.
The entity does.
Sure.
So the streamlining here that is being proposed is because one, we would have all of the licenses in the pocket so that we wouldn't have to go to the legislature multiple times, but also that we wouldn't have the town meeting. Would that be but that's it. So it would still go,
Right.
as Lori was saying, it would still go to the select board. So if I'm right, where you're seeing the time savings is both with the legislature and then maybe also a little bit with town meeting.
Correct. Yeah, town meeting and the home rule petition that goes to the legislature. Those are the two pieces that normally communities don't have to go through. Milton does, and we're just trying to say, let's kind of be like everybody else, not subject ourselves to the legislature's control if we don't have to.
Any other questions?
Okay,
Thank you.
sure. Next one is keeping with the theme around alcohol. Sorry. So, this next article is to amend the general bylaws of the town regarding alcoholic beverages. So presently, consumption on town property is prohibited. And we have language here that would allow consumption or sale of alcohol beverages on town property. We're not looking to have massive parties or anything. However, we occasionally get the requests for the use of town land for events that would coincide with a one-day alcohol license. the events down at the East Milton deck, we've been approached for a one-day alcohol license associated with that. I know the library trustees have talked about having small, lower key events that might include, beer or wine or what have you. So what we are proposing is not to just outright allow it, is to say, sure, there may be limited circumstances in which it makes sense to allow this to happen. But two things have to happen. You have to have approval of whoever has care, custody, and control of the building or the land. In the case of the library trustees have to be supportive. In case of the Council on Aging board would have to be supportive, and you need the approval of the select board, which would inherently need to approve it for the issuance of a one-day liquor license or a one-day alcohol license. So it's to shift away from an outright blanket prohibition to a more, sure, there may be events that this makes sense. We'll take it case by case with the approval of entity that's care, custody, control in the select board. And then obviously all the other requirements under general laws as it relates to alcohol would still be in effect. We require indemnification of the town. We require insurance coverages. So we would continue to do that for using town spaces going forward. So that is the gist of the proposal. It's chapter 105, of the general bylaws that we're proposing to change. So to take what's there today, remove it, and replace with the proposed language in the warrant. And the requests have been right now for the events down on the East Milton deck, which are Halloween and the tree lighting. The Milton Arts Center occupies a leased town-owned building, and there was already carve out saying that if you lease property from the town, you're allowed to host events with alcohol service with a one-day license. So that already takes place. But those are, what we have in mind presently is what we'd expect. And then maybe one or two other boards or committees might have interest for, programs curated and driven by themselves.
Samana. So just a concern, and you did speak to this, was insurance liability. Can you speak on who carries that burden? Like if this is using the town deck, there were an incident, accident that could be attributed to perhaps alcohol use.
Sure.
Especially with all the roads. And could you speak to that?
Yeah, we require that whoever is having the one-day license indemnify the town and have the appropriate insurance coverages.
Are there any requirements in terms of caps on money cap and liability?
I have the policy, I just don't have it in front of me. I could provide that as follow-up. And where this would be, so that's how we approach events in general.
Sure.
Where we're talking about something new that we'd be doing on town property, we'd be checking in with the insurance company prior to that to make sure that we're complying with whatever they would want to see from us. Typically, that's indemnification and being carried as an additional insured on anybody that's using any of our property.
And just to follow up to that, it's especially, and I'm just thinking town properties and the deck, and I think it's lovely to get people together like that. Is there any requirements for police presence, like a detail unit or anybody there? I know what I've seen. I live in East Milton, so I know the police are there. But is there any requirement that would put forward to have a paid police detail?
So there's nothing in the bylaw that would require that. For the two events that the town participates in, and those two, we work with the chamber and others to make sure, just with the sheer amount of kids coming and going, that there's coverage at each of the crossings. That's how we've approached those events. That's how we'd approach them going in the forward. We'd play it, case by case as it came forward in terms of if there's additional asks. But right now, what we're responding to is those two events in our mind, and then we'll play it by ears to see as things come forward. But where this is emanating from those kinds of events.
Sure.
And then we have the farmers market down at Wharf Park. Maybe there's something they might want to do, and we would have to play that kind of case by case as well.
Liz?
Would this be viewed each time you'd have to go, the chamber would have to go and get permission each year.
That's
Not
how
just
we
like
are
a
treated.
one-off, hello, now you have permission to have it. So that, to Tom's point, so if there were issues, they could be addressed, made sure that we were meeting them the next year. To your point also, I was curious whether there's a requirement for a bartender as well, because that limits liability in some instances as well. If the bartender serves it, I don't know. It would depend on how much people were drinking.
So we've, in those events, again, with our experience, it's been Navarre Abbey Park has been brought in as
Okay,
the provider.
yeah,
So
makes
it insulates that a little bit. That works for us. It makes it easier for us and makes our life easier. So, and to answer the question, no, it's every event requires approval in advance, whether there's alcohol or not. So any use of, whether it's the town green here with the gazebo or Manning Park, or even Wharf Park, requires approval ahead of time from the select board as it stands today for the use of town property.
So it's not gonna be bring your own cooler?
No, well,
Or could
not stated as such, correct? No, it would not be.
I'll be on record. It's on record, say bring your own cooler.
Well, because you want it to be cool.
Or water and sodas only.
We get the warrant committee.
Oh, that might not work out well. Mr. Funley.
Is there, I believe there's a house right next to the cemetery that's owned by the cemetery and is rented out for people to live in?
Correct.
Do I have that correct?
Yes. Yes.
What do you think my follow-up question is?
We haven't considered that case. It's leased. It's leased out.
Well, the old language talked about lease. The new language does not appear to.
Right.
Haha. Haha.
Interesting.
Okay, so pedantry aside, so that was my first question.
Is it owned by the town of Milton? Okay, that's a good question.
My second question, when they say town property, this encompasses parks, it encompasses schools even. I can
Correct.
imagine if
Yep.
PTO wanting to have a classy event like the library does, all is included.
Correct. It's meant to encompass any town of Milton land, including 211 Center Street next to the cemetery. Hopefully they're asking us for permission.
Every time.
Every
Yeah,
day.
every
Bottle.
I feel like a beer, I gotta call the town.
Excellent point, Jay. And just to expand on just the language, I assume that alcoholic beverages include spirits, beer, liquor. I mean, liquor, wine, and spirits.
Correct. And we it alternates between what people ask for. Generally, the one-day licenses often are usually just beer and wine. Only nonprofits can ask for an all alcohol. That's one restriction on the one-day licenses, that if you're a nonprofit entity, you can only nonprofit entities can get all alcohol. If you're some other entity, you can only apply for a beer and wine license.
Nick, maybe just like some future clarification on the lease question of the. I don't think we're leasing too many properties in town for private residences, but
Yes, no. We took that out thinking about the art center because they're covered under this. It's town property. They need to come to us anyway. They come to us because they're only doing one-day licenses, so they need the select board's approval anyway. So the 211 Center Street is a good question.
anyone else have anything on the? Thank you.
Sure.
Sorry, I'm thinking about as you were pointing out in the parks and the schools, the PTOs are gonna wanna have some event. Won't that somehow start setting a precedent? Because, I don't know, has anybody chatted about that? Like, how do you say, once you say yes, you can have an event and have beer and wine or full alcohol in the park, then every time somebody comes with a different event, what would be the decision-making criteria of how we would approach that?
I don't think the select board has laid out a policy in mind. I think we are planning to take it on a case-by-case basis and expecting a slope slow rollout here, but I also would assume some deference to the entity that has care, custody, and control. If the school committee is supportive of a PTO, for example, of having an event, things go well, take that into consideration as well. But it's going to be up to those entities as the kind of the first stop to say, you want to go down this road, and then come to the select board with a request. So it's kind of a two-step process for everybody.
Go ahead.
Yeah, you're picking a thing in my mind here. So, with Lori's slippery slope argument, now I'm concerned about it. So, well, one, I mean, I thought that was a good point. But two, I'm interested in who's enforcing this. So there are some rules about, like, I know you're only supposed to have 2 drinks at the bar if you're not eating food, and maybe that is or isn't enforced, and I'm not naming names, but who's in charge of enforcing this? And are we concerned about additional enforcement being needed? Because if you have a situation, to Lori's point, where now people are being able to drink in the Island Oasis, the deck, as Ian likes to call it, Island Oasis. So if people are drinking there, now, that's not so abnormal. Now who is checking to make sure that those people have a permit? Who is making sure that this is being enforced? So that it's not just like people are just drinking in the middle of East Milton Square all of a sudden.
I don't want to speak for the select board.
Sure.
We're not contemplating massive events on a regular basis.
Okay.
The requests could come in and maybe it causes them to pause and say, okay, how do we want to handle this? I think we're responding to what is anticipated to be a limited number of requests for a few specific events that are already taking place today. But if there's a greater appetite and a greater interest, then they'll have to, put some parameters in place. And ultimately, the entity that gets a one-day license, if they have to answer to the select board, they have to answer to the ABCC. It's not, you don't want to mess around with alcohol and violations associated with it. So,
But who's enforcing the people that don't have a license? Now people could see somebody drinking in East Milton Square and say, oh, we're drinking in East Milton Square now. And so if somebody is there without a license, I mean, the police, but
it's still public consumption, and it would be prohibited. So it would be, that would be criminal activity.
I'm just
at that point.
concerned that we're going to see an uptick in that in our wonderful police force. I don't want to increase their burden.
Well, not to answer for you, but maybe I will, but it still has to be a one-day event that's
Right.
approved by the selectmen. And they should be, like any bartenders that serve it, have to be tip certified.
Correct.
And that's part of the deal.
Yeah.
So I guess it's like, there's not gonna, as long as it's a one-day event and that something's going on, the Halloween event or something like that.
Mhm.
But the day after, there shouldn't be anything going on.
No, but 2 weeks later on a Friday night, 4 to 6, it's a nice, lovely spring night. And we just did something else that got approval. And there's a group of people that say, oh, I think we can drink on the deck now. And they go down and they are having cocktails.
I hear the concern. It'd be something we'd have to address. I think we're a small enough town that we would be able to kind of pinpoint who might be responsible and have eyes on it. But I think where the board is coming from is expecting a few discrete events a year. Let's get approval to do that. It's not saying it's limited to just that. And maybe over time, there's additional events that aren't contemplated today, but it's possible.
And you would expect most of these to be indoor events as opposed to standing on the deck and throwing
Yeah, again, I mean,
expressway?
Traffic.
the Council on Aging and the library trustees are the only ones that I've heard have talked about maybe having something potentially, but nothing even concrete from them. It was more like, oh, thanks for talking about this. It's something we've had some interest in. So.
Liz.
I don't want to keep beating down the door on this point. However, as a fellow East Milton resident and a person who's concerned, if we were playing Liz Dillon, what she says at Warrant Committee bingo, you could check off your I'm going to mention traffic in the square, because that is a real concern to people in our neighborhood. So again, I mean, I would just say that I'm concerned about enforcement.
Sure.
I know that it's irrelevant, but I know in the recent planning board meeting, a lot of concerns were raised about enforcement of different rules in East Milton Square. And so who's enforcing this? And then also, what is the impact going to be on, since East Milton, the deck is in the complete nexus of many roads. And then, as you just mentioned, the highway is right there too, just to make sure that we're really ensuring traffic safety.
Because we have had accidents where people get hit right there.
Or just ram into the Christmas tree.
That too. But we're getting concrete planters, so that will help.
Yes,
that.
thank you.
I don't, not speaking for the select board, I don't think they anticipate that this would be such a regular occurrence that people will just see it as a place to have outdoor beverages at their volition. I think they're anticipating, the chamber did the first Friday thing at the end of the summer, and then Halloween and Christmas are the 3 events that was September, October, and December, over the last several months that were the only events, and there's nothing in our mind planned for the spring as of yet.
And how is the alcohol supplied? Do people pay for it, or is it supplied by the library? Has an event, the library can just have alcohol and an open bar, if you will?
So for a one-day license, you have to buy from a wholesaler, and generally it's easier on everybody if you hire a caterer. So it's generally just contracted out. And again, speaking to having certifications and sourcing it properly. So it's that's generally the practice, and that's been our experience so far.
Anybody have any further questions? Okay. Nick, thank you. Let's go from wine to water.
Yes.
MWRA.
Very nice.
Not the way we'd like to do it.
Yes, I know, seriously. All right, so the next 2 articles are pretty interrelated. How to address these? Lead has become a major focus for the federal government and local and state government in terms of ensuring that lead is not leaching into our water supply system. Our water supply system currently is tested regularly for lead, and we continue to pass all those tests on a regular basis. However, there are service lines in Milton that are comprised of lead or galvanized steel, so I have that right. Anyway, so service line connects the water main in the street to a house. The town owns from the water main to what's called the curb stop, which is most of the way there. Property owners own from the curb stop into the house. We are seeking funding through both the next 2 articles to further our understanding of what our current lead quantities are. And if you give me a minute, I'll pull up some data now. But what has taken place over the last year, and you may have gotten notifications, or you should have gotten notifications in the mail, hopefully you responded, was surveys saying, hey, go down in your basement, find out where your water comes in, tell us if you have lead or not, tell us if you have copper. So we're trying to build our database to understand what private service lines look like. So both of these appropriations associate with further investigations to nail down exactly how many service lines are in town that may need to be replaced. The first one is $1.7 million from the MWRA. The MWRA offers a lead replacement program. Milton is an MWRA community, we can take advantage of that. So it's a 10-year zero interest loan program that we can participate in, and potentially 25% of it would be a grant. So maybe some of it would be free, but on balance, it's at least a 0% loan paid back over 10 years. The $1.7 million would be used to begin replacing lead service lines that we know about today. It would be to do a number of test pits and locations around town where our data is worse, to get firsthand knowledge of what exists, and to start designing out a lead replacement program and doing any associated engineering. So if we are doing a water main project on a street, and as they're digging up the road and they identify a lead service line, that gets replaced then and there. So Milton has been in the business of replacing lead service lines it encounters. Beginning in 2027, the federal government, under the new lead and copper rule, is requiring that towns begin remove lead service lines at a rate of 10% a year. So this is something we have to do at some point, no matter what. Luckily for Milton, we're in the MWRA, we can get no interest money to do so. So that's the parameters. The next article is, how much is it? $200,000. And the goal here is to do the data entry work, the studying work to further qualify how much. So the first one is to actually get in the ground and do some work. This one is to develop our lead service replacement plan, do studies, engage with homeowners further. So the second application would be an application to the, now I'm blanking on it. So the state government has a program as well, a grant that has been a grant program, so up to $200,000 in grant funding to fund these activities. So the goal here is to take advantage of either loan interest-free money or grant money to further understanding of lead service lines here in Milton. And we have a bunch of information on the DPW website about lead service lines. If folks are looking for more information, DPW Director Marina Fernandez can answer many more questions than I can about this. So if there's interest in a more in-depth conversation, we can certainly coordinate her to come down to the Warrant Committee before the town meeting. And I'll just, if I can find my data here. I think it's less than 50 lead service lines that we know about today. But I didn't have it up. So right now we know about 42 service lines that are lead out of 8,600 in town. That we know are definitely not, we have, of the 8,600, we know that 5,400 of them are copper. So about 63% we know are copper, which doesn't need any upgrades. The unknown number is about, right now, 1,600 service lines that are unknown. So those are the ones we're chasing after to qualify these numbers. We think, based on the data we have, that shouldn't be a huge amount of lead lines, but we need to go out in the fields and verify that information. So again, I can answer some questions. I may not be able to answer all. And Marina, who has been doing yeoman's work on this and taking numerous calls from residents about it, because everybody got a notification at the end of the year. Everybody in Massachusetts got a notification. Everybody in Milton got a notification from us saying your lead service line may contain lead. If you had an unknown lead service, if you had a service line that we didn't know what it was, or if we knew it was lead, you would have gotten notified. And yeah, sorry, questions.
Yeah. Of the small number that you know are lead service lines, are they clustered in a particular neighborhood? Is there, I would imagine they would be in older houses that are still using the original lines that are there. Because we haven't used lead in a long time.
No, it hasn't, and I think it's pre-1967 or some. There is a year where we know there was a firm cutoff, right. And so anything before then. To my knowledge, there isn't today a very clear pattern. I worked previously in Marlborough, and there was 1,200 lead service lines that we paid to remove every single one of them. Those were more clustered in the older part of town. Here it's a little bit not as obvious. And on top of that, we don't have as many. So yeah. We are in a better starting position than most communities, which is a good place to be.
Great.
And again, as water mains were replaced, we were taking out the lead anyway. And our knowledge is better on our side of the pipe. So it's about getting into homes and having residents check. That's the hard part. And right. There's one or two houses in Milton that, so it's hard to get out to everyone. future.
Got it. Thank you.
Sure.
Any other questions? Jay?
Yeah, I'm a little confused when you say our side, their side. Does the town own everything before the water meter? Like the water meter is in the basement.
No, there's what's called a curb stop
Okay.
so it's basically to the curb is the town's.
Okay, thank you.
And then you own the balance from there into the house.
Okay, so I'm confused. So what is this program for?
It's for, we need to replace all lead service lines, whether privately owned or publicly owned. So we're going out to validate.
I don't know what a service line is.
So the service line is considered the whole thing. So you start from the main in the street, your service line goes from the main in the street into your house.
Okay,
But it's not entirely town owned. So only a
Okay,
portion
thank
is
you.
yours and a portion is mine.
thank you.
Yep.
So but it's probably all made of the same metal?
Generally, yes, but not every time. So again, this gets to
Okay, that's
the
fine.
difficulties with verifying some of that information.
So if my house has a lead one, the town owns a small portion of it, I own a longer portion of it, the town would pay for the whole thing to be replaced, or this program would pay for the whole thing to be replaced?
So right now, that is how we've been treating them. As if we're going to take on replacing all private lead lines, that's when we'll have to have a longer conversation about what that might mean. Because, if it's, I don't know, over here between the Parkway and Blue Hill Ave, the houses are close together, their houses are close to the street.
Mhm.
And there is not a fancy, stone wall, maybe that's cheaper, but in another place of town where there's a longer distance between house and street, maybe that's a much more expensive endeavor. So communities will reimburse. The city of Boston does, they'll pay for the first $5,000, homeowners will pay for the rest.
Okay.
So there's different ways to develop that program, and that's one of the pieces that we'll have to do going forward in terms of when it comes to wholesale replacement of all private lead lines is what is the plan? And the first step that we're trying to accomplish here is how many of these problems do we need to deal with?
Okay, so the second article, the 200,000 is to find out how many, and the 1.7 million is to do the work?
I'm just pulling up the budgets for both. Give me a second. I thought they were in the packet, and I realized looking at it that the budget docs were not included.
Okay. I can tell you the question I'm going to ask is, why don't we ask for more? 1.7 million, let's ask for 17 million. Is that
We may need to, however, we don't know.
okay?
And we may come back with a subsequent appropriation saying, hey, there's 150 lead service lines that would cost $5,000 each to replace them. So we'll come in and ask for that money. So right now, they're planning to do replace the ones that we are aware of at $4,500 each, 450 test pits, and then expecting to find lead there, replace some of those that we find. And then there's cost included for designing that, doing any of the permitting that's required, and the department has plugged some funding for police details and such. So the $1.7 million is funding replacement, test pits, design work, and any potential police details. The $200,000 is funding our outside engineers and their work in terms of taking that data and making sense of it and doing the reporting that's required, both local in Massachusetts and to the federal government.
Okay, thanks. You answered my next question, who that was going to. And at the end of this, will we be able to say we have 0 lead service lines?
The goal.
I got one of those letters that said you might or might not have lead in your water. And I thought, well, this isn't enough. And then I forgot about it until tonight.
Yes. Well, you can go home and try to figure out if it is lead.
Maybe I didn't read it closely enough. Okay.
So the goal is not to say after we spend this $1.7 million, we will have 0. The goal is to say, hopefully after we spend the 1.75, we will know how many there are,
Yeah.
and we'll have a plan to replace them over the next 5-10 years, whatever that is.
Yeah, that's what I was asking.
Yep.
Will we know I phrased it wrong.
Okay.
Will we know for a fact how many, like you talked about digging 500 holes, well, that's a lot, but that's not 2,000 or
Sure.
however many you're talking
Yep.
about.
I would defer to Marina on knowing for sure. I think
Okay.
the goal is to have as much of that unknown nailed down.
Okay, thank you.
And I'll send you the link to our website, but you can, it tells you how to look at the pipe in your house and determine what material it is made of.
Thank you.
And just again, the water is tested regularly. We're not failing lead tests. This is part of a broader project to just remove this as a potential issue in Milton and across Massachusetts, really.
And in 3 years, the feds are going to be leaning.
Yeah,
On
everybody's
everything.
on a 10% rate plan to start replacing them. And there's been a lot of federal money being pushed to this too, which is why we're in this position to be able to take advantage of either grant programs or no interest loan programs.
And to build on that, and you may not be able to answer this, but once you open the hole and you see the problems, like, is there any anticipation, was there any discussion about federal monies coming to states to address this issue, given what happened in Michigan? Or is that not part of it?
No, the infrastructure bill, or one of the larger federal infrastructure bills in the recent years, is providing money for this that flows to the states, and then the states are distributing it, and that's through the Clean Water Trust that we would plan to apply for the second article. And then other entities are receiving funding, grant funding that's going out. So that money is flowing, but it wouldn't come directly to Milton. It would be distributed through the state, which is how we're planning to access it.
And the feds would be setting the guidelines for distribution of the money, not the state?
I can't answer that question, so I
Just to
won't
know,
try
the
to.
feds will set the guidelines, say, state, here's the money, these are the guidelines you are to follow. Don't change them.
That's a Marina question, sorry.
I appreciate that.
Sure.
Lori, do you have a question?
If you can just go back to the 1.7 that we're appropriating.
Yep.
And it's 4,500 a line, so how many are we anticipating?
Under this situation, her budget has 52 being replaced out of the 1.7. So it's 52 replacement of lead lines today, 450 test pits.
Yeah, got that.
And then expecting to find additional lead, another 15 that we budgeted for replacement. And then there's additional kind of soft costs involved.
Okay.
And I'll distribute that through Karen, so you have it. And then obviously more specific questions, I will defer to her.
Thank you.
The draft mentions town lead service line investigations, but the comments mention private property. Should be expanded to include.
On which article?
That's a good question. The one.
Oh, sorry, they're not numbered, are they?
Excess.
1.7 million or 200,000?
1.7. It mentions, the recommendation doesn't mention, I don't think it mentions private.
So financing the towns, meaning the efforts that we're going to undergo to do lead service line investigation. So we're going to go out and investigate lead service lines in Milton. That's what that references to. Not necessarily just what we technically own. All right.
And we can discuss after this tomorrow if we want to bring the engineering. Okay. On to the next, I guess, Mr. Milano.
Okay. This is the Senior Citizen Tax Exemption Program, I believe, right? Is that where we are? Okay, yes. So I had previously given an outline of this program at a prior meeting with the Warrant Committee, so I won't go into great detail, only just to kind of reiterate that the point of this program is to provide a local tax exemption for seniors who have lived in Milton for at least 10 consecutive years. Their eligibility would not be determined by Milton. The eligibility would be determined if that senior receives the Senior Citizen Circuit Breaker income tax credit, which is applied to the state on an annual basis with state income taxes. This is a program that has a wide variety, a long list of qualifications that folks have to meet. So if you meet those income requirements, the value of your home, age, the portion of your income that's property taxes, and you are eligible for the Senior Citizen Circuit Breaker income tax credit, what we are proposing to do is say, okay, you got X dollars from the state, will match that money locally towards your property taxes. It is not proposed to be a quote unquote tax cut in the sense that it means that the town will bring in less tax revenue. It just means that we'll carve out the amount of money for this program and shift that burden to the rest of the taxpayers in town. Right now, there are, I just have to pull up the document. In terms of what this might look like for costs. The tax credit was recently increased through the big, one of the new tax laws that was approved by the legislature. So for tax year 2024, which is the current tax year, the total maximum credit is $2,730 they can get from the state. And the select board has talked, in the language in the home rule petition, authorizes the select board to set a match percentage. The board has talked about perhaps a 50% match, which would be, if somebody got the maximum, it'd be what, about $1,300-ish on an annual basis. So that is kind of the broad outlines. We've been in touch with a few other communities that offer it. A lot of the communities offer 100% match. However, with the increase in the credit that the state is offering, some of them are having conversations about what that should be for this year. So how this would work is you would file your taxes in the spring for the prior tax year, and then you would apply to the assessors in the summer. And then the tax exemption that you would receive would be for the property taxes that followed. So it would constantly be on a lag in terms of your eligibility would be for the tax year prior, but you'd receive the benefit in the fiscal year that follows. And if we were looking at, so we have in the tax year, so the tax year that's most recently available for us for data from the state is there were 452 filers in tax year 2020. In Milton, the average credit received for those Milton filers was $1,000. And at the time, the maximum credit was about $1,100. So close to the maximum credit in tax year 20. So, bring that forward to this year, there's about 450 potential filers. The credit has gone up. The select board's talked about matching about half of that. One thing that we found is just because folks file on their taxes for the tax credit doesn't mean they're applying locally. The trend has been around for other communities to have about 30% of total filers applying for it locally. So not necessarily will we see 400 applications come in the door. The trend has more been closer to about 30% because their renters wouldn't be eligible because it's a tax credit and a property tax exemption. One of the requirements is that you live in town for a certain amount of years. That might bounce out certain people. Your home has to be of a certain value, so people with a higher value home above kind of what is our average home wouldn't be eligible. So there's different eligibility criteria that might disqualify people who do receive the credit from the state. And then, where was I going? I think those are the kind of the reasons that we hear. And then the other requirement is that anybody with significant assets would also be deemed ineligible, and that's generally treated in other communities that have adopted this as owning a second home would be a disqualifier. So there might be folks who have a vacation home, and that's considered as a significant asset and ruled that they're not eligible for the program. So the article is a home rule petition because we cannot do this without the legislature's approval. So town meeting would need to approve it. If town meeting does approve it, it would need to be submitted to the legislature for, again, kind of a similar process to the liquor license, adopted by the legislature, and then the town would be able to begin the program in the tax year subsequent to that approval. This language that we have used has been used in a number of other communities. It's, we're stealing from what other communities have done, so it tracks closely, pretty much word for what other communities have done to approach this. And we've envisioned it as, we have an override on the horizon. We knew a big school project was coming, so as we were sitting around thinking about whether there's other revenue sources we should be chasing or ways to mitigate that impact on seniors. That's where it emanated from. So that is the proposal in front of you. Again, happy to take questions, and I can follow up with some additional information if there's a interest in discussing it at a deeper level.
Judy on Zoom, and then Liz after Judy. Judy.
Hi, thank you, Tom. Before I start asking my questions, and you notice that's a multiple there, that's plural. I need to, Tom, help me with the word I'm looking for. I need to make a disclosure.
Yes.
So I did check this out at the town hall, that I would not be in violation of ethics. It would appear due to my age that I might be eligible for this. However, the math doesn't work for me to apply to either of the tax relief programs for seniors in our town. So, and I used up a lot of napkins doing this projected math, past math, and current math. So my question goes to something that you just said that apparently I wasn't paying attention to. On this asset requirement to apply, are you just going to use secondary homes, or do you anticipate using other criteria for assets?
The way,
in other words, I could have $5 million in the bank, but my income per year matches the requirements. So how are you going to address that?
so the home rule petition doesn't, as currently written, doesn't define significant assets. It provides that responsibility to the Board of Assessors to be a decision made as they before they roll out the program. So the language in the home rule petition says that the Board of Assessors may deny an application if they find the applicant has excessive assets that place them outside the intended recipients of the senior exemption created by this act. The Board of Assessors shall adopt a policy for approvals and denials of applications. So it kicks the responsibility, or the obligation to develop that and then monitor that to the Board of Assessors as they develop the program. And my reference to second homes was in conversations with other communities who have this in place. That is the main item they pointed to. I'm not saying it's an exhaustive list. That was just an example.
Yeah, I mean, that would be, your first take there. I do wonder, though, how you would monitor assets. How are if they point to a secondary home, I don't know, do you think that's a slippery slope? I mean, I think it's a necessary step, in a way, but how are you gonna do it? You had a meeting last night, I think, with the assessors for Wakefield, and did they give you any hint that they look further than property?
I would have to follow up with our assessor on that. I don't know. I didn't ask that question at the time. I will get back to you on that one, or I'll ask Nick to follow up.
Okay, I don't know why I missed that. I thought I saw it, but anyway, I just wanted to point out and verify, it is my understanding, talking to Nick Connors, that you will be keeping the tax work-off program as a viable option for seniors to choose, and not eliminating it just because a new program is coming in.
No, this is meant to be an additional opportunity to the tax work-off program.
And just to sort of clue everyone in, it's my understanding in my conversations with the town about this, that an applicant can choose either or program or both, if all the criteria is met
That is correct.
in the application process. Okay. Tom, would we want to discuss the differences between the two programs now or at another time?
Judy, you can raise them, or we can make that part of our discussion. Do you have any other questions for Mr. Milano regarding the work off?
Not right at this second. I'm going to let some other people cycle through, and then something else might pop in my head.
Okay, please do. Liz is next, then.
I had 2 questions about section 2D. The first one being, so it says that you have been domiciled and owned a residential unit of real property. So the letter A is upsetting to me. So is it any residential property, meaning you move from over here to over here and you don't have to restart your time? So if I move from this side of town to another side of town, I'm still within that 10 consecutive years? Or is it a single residential property, you have to live in the same home for
No,
10 years?
it's meant to acknowledge residency in Milton, not necessarily residency at a specific address.
Vaguely written, but whatever. And then, so I'm interested in sort of.
Sorry, just to build on that. So the Wakefield application says, certifying that you've been a resident of the town of Wakefield for the past 10 years. And that is taking that language into how it would be treated in effect.
Okay. And then, so if you were to move within that 10-year period, you don't have to start the clock again, is my point. Okay. And then the second thing, so this 10 consecutive years, I'm a little bit curious about that because the way that I read it, you could have lived in Milton your entire life. For circumstances out of your control, something happens, your health, whatever, you have to move for a year. You move back to Milton, to the home that you've owned the entire time, but you didn't live there, so you weren't domiciled there. Maybe you had to go live with your kids in Florida for a year because, health reasons. Boom, you're done. You have to restart the clock the way that this is written because it says domiciled and owned property. They both have to be true. I don't know how many people that would affect because, as you said, it's very, very few people. But I'm just bringing up the way that it's written is there's a circumstance whereby somebody who has lived in Milton their whole entire life, is a senior citizen, owned their same home the whole entire time, would otherwise be able to take advantage of this, wouldn't because for whatever reason they had to be domiciled for a period of time someplace else, like a tax year.
Sure. And yeah, I don't know what a alternative language suggestion might look like. I wouldn't say the select board. I think the select board's intention is to, take something that has been in practice in other communities. And I think the goal with this sentence is to, treat finding folks who have called Milton home for a long duration of period. So if there's language that might address those kinds of situations, I could certainly bring that to them, or the warrant committee could include it as part of their recommendation that goes to town meeting.
Yeah, I mean, for example, it could say like 10 out of the last 20. I mean, I don't know, but 10 out of the last 20 years or something like that, just to kind of say, okay, you have lived here, but if there is some circumstance in which you have to go live someplace else for a very brief period of time, fine. You're still a Milton person. Welcome back. Come on. Have this tax benefit.
No, I don't think there would be any strenuous objection to looking at and reviewing potential alternative language.
I just want to make sure that all the people that are intended to be covered would be covered. Okay.
Yeah, I think we can just certainly discuss this, and I think we can make some recommendations on some of the language. I think they're.
Excuse me. My understanding is this is based on the state tax credit, right?
Yes.
If you meet that criteria, then you should be able to get it in Milton, right? With these rules.
Correct. Yes.
So they would have. I'm sorry, go ahead.
There wouldn't be any criteria in the state tax credit for where you live. You just have to be in Massachusetts. So that this is a more restrictive locally, but the base income, house value, other criteria are based on if you qualify for the state one.
Right, you have to qualify to stay with us. So they have your other income and other asset information.
Correct.
That's part of that.
Yep.
Fine, okay. And, so you think it's 452 people?
That received it in
Or that
in
range.
tax year 2020 total that received this credit in Milton that
So-
tax year.
So then it would be an additional $1,300 roughly.
Correct.
So it's $587,000.
If full participation, and if the town matched it at 100%. So in the experience of the, I'm sorry, you're right, you did the math right, you did it at 50% match. What we have found is that other communities have seen about a 30% of those filers, so 30% of the 452
Really?
have been the ones who have applied locally. You know, maybe Milton's experience will be slightly higher, slightly lower. I think when we spoke to somebody up on the North Shore, they said they were closer to 40%, but it had been in place for 9 years in each of those communities. So it's been something that they've been able to advertise, kind of socialize, and becomes more awareness around. And they're closer to 40% participation. But I think Hingham is the other one that has rolled it out, and they were closer to 30% when they kicked it off.
Yeah, I want to follow up largely on what Member Spiel mentioned, which is, so it seems to me that the state has rules that, among other things, look at the financial situation of the senior. And if you meet those state rules, then you get the state benefit. And then we're saying, okay, we'll look at those state rules, and we'll also look at other things like, are you Milton resident? But then I'm quite concerned about this. And then we'll also see if you have excessive assets. That does concern me. And I'm sort of just repeating what my colleague said earlier, but if one person has a Cape house and very little money in the bank, and another person has a lot of money in the bank and no Cape house, will one person, quote unquote, get caught and the other one won't get caught? If they were all going to get caught, obviously somebody could give the Cape house, sell it to their kid for $10, and then it seems to cause more problems than it solves by putting that part about the excessive assets in there.
Sure, and I think we saw it was something that was being used, was something that was being administered in other communities, and didn't feel a strong objection to it. And I think in one of the communities, the application just asks, do you own another piece of property? If yes, where? And that's the extent of the digging they do. So I think it's...
I've got a couple objections to that.
Yeah.
One thing, I don't want to punish people for being honest.
Right.
And another thing, do you own a piece of property? No, but I have $10 million in Vanguard. Yeah,
If you had 10 million, I'm sorry,
go on.
just a counterpoint. If you had $10 million in Vanguard, you would not qualify for the state
Is that true?
credit. I would believe that to be true.
You're not on
because-
microphone, by the way.
Okay.
Well, I just don't think it's close enough to your face. But
Yeah.
okay.
No, I mean, some of the,
Yeah, did the
I
state
would,
rules...
you would assume, I don't know the state rules specifically, but that kind of, those assets would probably disqualify you from getting credit at the state level.
Just from 30 seconds of Googling, it looks like it looks at income, period. Income and the value of your house.
The income from the 10 million that you had in assets would probably be enough to,
People who are smarter than me can...
that would be my guess.
You have more than 72,000. It's a whole series of rules.
Okay, so-
91.
So-
That's a concern of mine. I don't know if it's going to get solved tonight, but that's a concern. Can I bring up a couple other things?
Sure.
One other, for example, people living in Home Inc. in Fuller Village. I'll admit my in-laws lived in Fuller Village for multiple years, and I still don't understand the ownership structure of that. Are they at all eligible for this? If you don't
So
know,
I
that
think-
would be a good thing to find out.
At Home Inc., they own the parcels, don't they? I will
No,
double
it's-
check.
I can help everyone with that. It's really easy. What you do if you live at Fuller Village in Home Inc., it's called a buy-in, which equates to a lifetime lease. So you are let's just say the price of a unit at either one of those is 400,000, you pony up the 400, and in return for that, you get a lifetime lease. So basically, you're a renter with that money because you don't own that at all. It's held in reserve. So when you vacate that property, that unit actually, because that's what it is. That's all it is a unit. Then whatever, you either get the money back if you're just moving to, Montana, or your estate gets the money back. It's not a sell. You don't personally sell it.
So it sounds like that would imply that the residents of Home Inc., Fuller Village, I don't know about some other ones in town, would not benefit from this?
Correct, it's a
They-
property tax exemption.
Oh, they don't pay,
They don't.
yeah. They don't pay.
Yeah, they don't pay individual taxes, exactly, Jay. Thank you, Mr. Milano.
And that's true of Fuller too?
Yes.
Yes,
Um,
Thanks, Judy.
and- Okay, and I guess my third thought is just about the timing. I think this is great. I think this is a great idea that I want to support. I definitely want to support it if it goes hand in hand with an override. I listened to the meeting last night. Likely to have an override, but nothing's certain, and not certain how big the override's going to be. And if there is one, we'll be voting on it in either April or June. Would it be? I would love this to go hand in hand with an override. Would it be more prudent to have this at the Maytown meeting?
If it didn't require legislative approval,
Okay.
yes, because I think legislative approval may not arrive in time for fiscal year 26 tax bills because we would need we need to get it approved locally at home at town meeting. It needs to go through the legislative process, signed by the governor. Then we would need to roll the program out, advertise it, get applications in by end of August at the latest
Of this current calendar
year before the select board sets and the assessors set the tax rate. So the timelines are tricky for that. So my suggestion would be is since the unknown time is the legislature's, the sooner to get it up there is more effective.
Is there any way to overtly link them? Can we write in this? This is what's going to happen if an override passes this year. I might be decapitated for suggesting something like that, but just asking.
Yes, I'm sure there could be language written into it that said, only shall be effective on a year in which the town of Milton approves an override or something. Just kind of, I'm sure.
Am I inhuman for suggesting that?
I think the point is trying to provide some tax relief, whether, regardless of what we do, but more so because of the conversations around the override.
Wait. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Well, I had a separate thing to ask, but Jay sort of, thoughts spurred by other people, so that's good. So Jay's thoughts spurred something in me. So if people to whom this credit does not apply are now going to be sharing I don't want to call it a burden because I don't feel like it's a burden, but the additional cost in their own tax bill, and there is going to be an override, and there is maybe going to be a debt exclusion. This is a lot of money that people in the town are going to have to put forth. So to that extent, I think Jay's point, makes a lot of sense because it could be additional money, and many people in this town, are really paycheck to paycheck. So I want to be respectful of that. But also, is it possible to go to the legislature, have this be contingent upon an override being approved, have it go to the legislature now? Would they be willing to do that because they don't know if we're having an override? Would that slow down the process? I have two questions, so that was the first. Yeah.
Can a legislation be crafted with language that says that? I'm sure somebody could work on language to that effect. the debt stabilization fund that funds how we're paying for the fire stations had language in there that says that if voters approve a capital project such as this, so there's kind of similar language that established that funding mechanism. So the language could exist. None of the versions we've looked at have anything explicit like that. They've all, not all, I said generally we see that these are considered when significant capital projects are being undertaken or operating overrides are being sought. And then just one kind of corollary to it I'll note is that one of the requirements for qualifying for the senior citizen circuit breaker tax credit is it looks at a percentage of your income that is related to your property taxes. So if folks' property taxes increase, then maybe more people would be eligible for it as well. So that's almost, so that's something else to keep in mind as a potential benefit. If the taxes go up, maybe somebody who wasn't eligible last year now will become eligible.
Right, provided you meet all the other criteria.
If you meet,
Still
yeah, if
have
you
to
check
be
all the
over
other boxes,
65,
correct.
et cetera, et cetera.
Right, exactly.
My second question was, so if you were to apply and were denied because of your secret millions of dollars that the town thought you had in Vanguard, but you don't really, is there an appeals process, or is it just whoever decides this decides and then you're done?
So it would, right now, the home rule petition doesn't specify what that could be or would be. The Board of Assessors could include one in their policy that they put forward.
I'm just interested because it seems like we have some questions about what is what was the word, like an excess asset?
Yeah, it says excessive or
Excessive,
significant
what does that mean?
assets.
An excessive asset. And also we have questions about, what constitutes your income. So
Sure.
if there were that vagary, I would want to say, okay, if I'm unhappy, now if I get the tax credit, I'm going to be happy, so fine. But if I don't get the tax credit because somebody thinks, oh, you have an excessive asset, I don't agree with that. What is the process that we can resolve that within the town in the appeals process? So now I'm not calling up my lawyer or whatever, God forbid.
Yeah, there isn't anything in the home rule petition that contemplates that. The Board of Assessors policy could, generally, staff would review applications. It could be, somebody could say, well, I want to bring this to the Board of Assessors. That might be an avenue for that, to bring it directly to the board in that case.
So Nick, I guess to build off what member Dylan had to say, I mean, this is like the cart before the horse, right? In a way, like we approve the article and then we kind of approve the details later.
Yes.
With the
but
assessors, I don't know, I'm not speaking in a
Yeah.
negative tone. But
No, I know what you mean, is that the home rule petition contemplates a separate body will have these discussions later, but, the language could specify more parameters as to what that might be. If
That's true. So when, and Craig, I should know this, when the assessors bring forth a policy, when they draft a policy, appeals, maybe to the domicile issue, if you're, if you have a health issue and it's 6 months, 6 months is the domicile rule, work that out, but that policy and those procedures, appeals process, would those be approved by the select board? Would they be approved by town meeting?
No, this
They would just independently
would be
set
up
by
to the,
assessor.
it's a separate board that would be acting on its own,
Okay.
under its own purview. And generally, I wouldn't say they have a lot of policies because what they operate under is pretty much governed very strictly by state law in terms of tax abatement process, charitable exemption processes. So it's more about adhering to the rules of Department of Revenue. This is a case where they would be empowered to put a few other things into place.
Sure. So they would alone set any parameters.
Correct.
Judy, next.
Oh, thank you. Just to touch base on a few things I heard. In regards, I thought this would be important. In regards to Fuller and Homey, bear in mind, both of those properties do pay taxes to the town of Milton. They're both nonprofits. So I'm not quite sure what their tax rate is, but if you live in either Fuller or Home Inc., after you plunk down all this money that you can't touch as long as you live there, it's like in a vault. You also pay a monthly fee, which increases each month. And that monthly fee goes to maintenance and all kinds of other things, but also included in that is paying taxes on the entire property as a whole, not as individual people. The second thing that I wanted to touch base on is it's my understanding that the legislature has, and Nick correct me if I didn't get this right, has up to 24 months to approve what we're sending for approval. It could take 2 months, or they could have a lot on their plate and it could take 10 months. There's no set time. Because I heard someone, I think Jay was you, correct me, that thought it would, or maybe it was Liz. I'm sorry.
No, that is correct. Once it's filed, it has to go through the committee hearing process, go through both houses of the legislature. So sometimes home rule petitions can move incredibly fast. Sometimes they just get tied up in, the legislature's processes. So yes, I would agree that range 2 months, 24 months sounds pretty fair.
Okay, and then just one last thing. I do have a cheat sheet here about, let's say you are going to use the circuit breaker credit. It's a credit on what you owe the MDR. Similar to a child tax credit. It's the same kind of premise. It's a credit on what you owe. Just to, if you are a married couple filing joint, the income limit is $109,000. I think that's very generous. However, if you are a single person, it is $72,000 is the threshold to be applicable for filing. And how that's calculated is your property tax plus how it will then, once you meet that requirement, to understand how you actually get the credit, your property tax payment and 1/2 of your water and sewer, not sure about that stormwater thing. So you take that number, divide it in half. Now, those two things must exceed 10% of mass income. So let's just take a single person, that's $72,000. Your tax bill and water and sewer has to be more than $7,200. So, and there is an assessed value of your own house. And I'm sure, Nick, will this be in play for the assessor's office to do the circuit breaker? The assessed value of your house can be no more than $1,172,000. Now, here in this town, I do find it conceivable that you could be in a house you bought 40 years ago for $100,000. It's now well over that figure on the open market and assessed value. Would that be fair to mention?
Yes, but to qualify for the tax credit and then for the local exemption, you would have to be under that valuation since that is part of the state requirements.
Part of the tax credit, okay.
Right.
So, anyway, I just thought I'd cover those things up, thank you. So conceivably, Jed, back to you, if I could. If you had, a couple of mil in the Vanguard, and you don't have any other income, all the money you make on that could be under $109,000. Who's to know? Anyway, so I look forward to having our discussion after we get through all these articles in the town meeting. All right, thank you.
Yeah, just to clarify, I looked at the state's laws and I couldn't find that they have any comments about other assets. I couldn't find them as a piece.
Right.
And that, so saying that, that's the only concern I have, is that seems kind of squishy, like, gee.
Sure.
So.
Okay.
just a comment.
Jay?
I want to go back to the comment that my colleague Ms. Dillon raised earlier about domiciled and owned within for the past 10 years. My colleague was talking about domiciled. I'm a little concerned about owned, honestly. I might want to see the word or in between those because for three reasons come to mind. One is, I mean, this seems directly aimed at renters. And I've heard in recent years that sometimes renters in Milton feel like second-class citizens. I don't want them to feel like second-class citizens. If someone rents in Milton for 20 years, raises their kids here, and around the time they're retiring, they get enough money to buy a house, I don't know how often that happens. Maybe never. But if it does, I'd want them to be able to participate in this program. There's a second group aside from renters, clergy. The minister at my church and the minister in multiple churches in town do not own their own house. They live in houses owned by the church. If one of them wants to retire in Milton, buys a house, clergy are not famous for how wealthy they are. They'd be another case that could participate in this. And there's a third group that may not make me many friends by bringing it up, but Milton Academy teachers some of them do not live on property they own. If they want to buy a house in Milton, retire here, teachers like clergy, not famous for how rich they are, no matter what you think of their employer. So, I don't know, I might want to say, I might want to explore domiciled or owned residential piece of property. Maybe that would open a can of worms to slum lords that own terrible places in town and then come here and are bad people. I don't know what can of worms that would open, but.
Okay. No, I think that's a good question. I think the intention was to keep it to folks who have been here for a long time. I don't think it was meant to, identify folks in those examples, but because if you're living in a rental property, you are ultimately still contributing to tax bills that arrive to the town. So it's a question I can bring to the board. Our next meeting isn't until the 28th, so if it's something the Warrant Committee wants to address directly in its recommendation too, that's also an option. And so what I'm hearing is the excessive asset question and then this question here in section D, the main.
Yeah. So, go ahead.
And I'm kind of hung up on section 3 where it's, the select board will set the exemption amount, provided that the exemption shall be within a range of 50 to 100%. Are we ever going to decide that, or when will that get decided, or will the assessors decide that?
So I think the intention was to give flexibility because of what we just saw with how the state essentially doubled the credit. And I think what we've talked about is 50% for now. If the credit doesn't really move much, maybe they increase that over the next couple of years to give them flexibility. They would establish it presumably once this is passed and approved by the legislature. But
So I guess for me, it would be, I don't know how the heck you're gonna do it. If there's 452, what's gonna be the cost, the 587 potentially, or $1.2 million?
right.
And then how does that affect the remaining taxpayers?
Sure.
What's that amount that's gonna be?
So I can share with the Warrant Committee a chart that we did to kind of forecast that out. Again, it's just a forecast. We don't know exactly. So we did it basing on assuming we showed, 100% match, 50% participation, gave a couple of different scenarios and what that shift to the rest of the taxpayers would look like. So we can distribute that to the board. That's the Warrant Committee.
Thank you.
Sure.
I just wanted to kind of go off Jay's point again. So maybe sort of why this 10-year requirement at all. I understand the purpose is so that seniors who have lived in our town, contributed to our town, can stay in their houses in the town. And I think everybody understands that. But just the examples that Jay just gave, I mean, I don't think that huge amounts of people are able to flock to our town because of our low housing prices. So if somebody can live here and is getting a small, very small rate decrease, that's a very marginal case. If there are all of these people that Jay just identified, renters, things like that, I wonder why we have to say, right, like, couldn't it be or? I don't, and I also don't really understand if this 10-year time period. So I would just be curious about having all of that language kind of talked about a little bit more.
Okay. Yeah, like I said, again, the select board will meet again on the 28th. I can bring the comments and questions to them. If this board is intending to kind of finalize its recommendation sooner than that, I can see if they would also support those changes. But it is ultimately the warrant committee's recommendation that will be printed in the warrant.
And Nick, this is language that you've taken from another
Correct.
community.
Yeah,
And
they
is it
pretty much track the same over and over again. Generally the same.
with all of them.
Yep. I think what's most important for us to keep in mind is this is something, the concept of the program and using the circuit breaker tax credit is like the main blueprints of it.
Mm-hmm.
This stuff is more, it can be worked around because the Department of Revenue is familiar with it. They know how to deal with it when we're setting our tax rate. So like that, sticking to this blueprint in terms of relying on the senior circuit breaker tax credit is the key component of it.
Any other questions, comments from Mr. Milano?
All right.
Okay.
MSBA, right? Yes. All right, so the one I have next is the one related to the school building committee. So as everyone knows, school building committee, we have a school building committee here in town. And I'm not sure if everybody knows, but the town was invited into the Massachusetts School Building Authority program, the MSBA program, in December. So we will start in that program in May to go through the MSBA process for a school project. Ultimately, at the end of that would be reimbursement from the MSBA for a school project for eligible costs of somewhere around 45% of eligible costs on a project. One of the requirements that the MSBA puts out is that you have a school building committee that meets their regulations and their expectations. So our school building committee is a 9-member committee. It was established in 2019 by town meeting. 5 members are appointed by the moderator, 2 members are appointed by the school committee, and 2 members are appointed by the select board. The MSBA requirements for a school building committee have additional requirements that the superintendent of schools serve on it, the town administrator serve on it, the chief executive officer serve on it. In this community, that's a representative of the select board. That's already covered. They require that the school committee representative be on it. Our version already covers that. The facilities director is required to serve on it. One of the members has to have what's called MCPPO certification, which is the state certification requirement. The school principal for the project application, in this case, we applied to the MSBA for the Cunningham School as our statement of interest, so that principal is expected to is required to be on it. And then there's a local budget official or finance committee member who's expected to serve on it. So what we have is a warrant article from the school committee. School committee submitted the original warrant article to establish the school building committee, so they've submitted an article to expand that membership to hit those staff positions and make them non-voting members, but add them to the school building committee so that Milton School Building Committee will then comply with the MSBA's requirements. So each of those positions as listed are added as non-voting members to serve on the committee, participate in the discussions, but not actually cast votes on the direction that the building committee takes. At the select board meeting last night, we got a question as to whether it would be if the article could identify the entire roster so it's all in one place for everybody and everybody knew who the voting and non-voting positions were. So I have slightly tweaked this since I distributed it to accommodate that request. I've sent this back to the school committee chair. It is their article that they submitted to the select board just to get their take on it. But it wouldn't make any changes to that 9 members. It would just say, reiterate who they were and who their appointing authority was, and that they're 9 voting members. I think that's the gist of this article.
No, sure.
How many members are on the committee now?
9.
There's 9 now. This
Correct.
adds just.
This would add 6, right? Yeah, 6 non-voting. So 9 voting would remain, 6 non-voting would go on.
Easy meeting.
As of members of 15-member committee.
I'll go from 2 hours.
Interesting,
to
like
5.
quorum is only of voting members, so.
Oh, that makes sense, I think.
Right.
Any questions on this or comments for Mr. Milano? It seems very straightforward. It's a requirement by statute. We like to get help from the state.
Right.
I do, you ready to go on to the next one?
I am, yep. If everybody is.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. So the next article is a funding article to fund the feasibility study to be conducted with the MSBA. I have a few slides if folks want background or more in-depth background on the MSBA process. I'll pull them up if needed, but you'll find as we go through this is a bureaucratic process. There's many steps, there's many requirements, there's many reports. The first component of working with the MSBA program is what they call eligibility period, where they call it confirming that the community is ready to engage in a study with MSBA. So it's things like forming the school building committee. In our case, we have a little bit of a head start. We just need to clean up our school building committee membership, as we just discussed. You have to sign some paperwork with MSBA. As part of this process and eligibility period, you also have to work with MSBA to nail down exactly what will be studied. What is the grade configurations that will be studied, and how many students will be in each of those. In the letter from the MSBA inviting Milton into the program, we've been invited to study a K-5 project and a grade 7-8 project. So now part of the eligibility period would be say, okay, if we're building a K-5 school or doing a K-5 project, how many students would be in that building? And if we're doing a grade 7-8 project, how many students would be in that building? And then the final major component of eligibility period is securing an appropriation to fund the feasibility study, which is the next phase. The feasibility study portion of the MSBA process starts with procuring an owner's project manager who will be with the project from that point until closeout. Once the owner's project manager is on board, and that's a local procurement, so we'll put out a request for qualifications. The school building committee will review and interview the applicants, select somebody. MSBA will review the selection process, and then we'll enter into a contract with that owner's project manager, or OPM. Then we'll procure designer services. Under the MSBA program, you select an architect through the designer selection panel, the MSBA's designer selection panel. So that is not a local procurement that we do in conjunction with the MSBA. And the panel is comprised of 3 Milton representatives and then a number of MSBA staff, board members, and outside participants. And that group selects who the architect on the project will be. Once your professional team is aboard, then you commence the feasibility study, which is evaluating all the options in the MSBA program. And we're going to be referring to this as the Cunningham School Project because the MSBA requires us to refer to it as the school project for which we filed the statement of interest. So if you see Cunningham School, it doesn't mean there's going to be a project at the Cunningham School. It just means it's the Cunningham School project that we applied for. However, the feasibility study will study a repair to the Cunningham School of any capital assets that need to be repaired. It'll be studying an addition renovation at Cunningham. It'll study a new K-5 and a new 7-8 per the parameters of the MSBA Board of Action letter that approved us coming in. So the feasibility study will cover looking at all those options in the first phase, reviewing, fine-tuning those options to a preferred option with like very preliminary sketches and cost estimates to finally get into what they call schematic design, which is you have a building designed, studied, cost estimates, and you go out to the voters for town meeting approval and the ballot question approval. And this process could take us anywhere from 2 to 3 years to get from where we are today to going to the voters. So we need funding for that. We are recommending, and the school building committee is recommending an appropriation of $1.5 million. We looked at some feasibility studies recently conducted for middle school projects, and they range between $1.2, $1.3 million. Any expenses that are eligible in feasibility study will be reimbursed by the MSBA. So while we have to appropriate the full amount, we would expect to get 45% back in reimbursement of what we spend. So if the feasibility study ends up costing us $1.3 million, we'll be reimbursed for 45% of that, only after taxpayers will step up for the portion that's ours. Last night, the select board talked about, since we're seeking this appropriation now, where we really, there's no deadline for us to do that until 270 days after May 1st. So our eligibility period starts May 1st. You have to secure an appropriation within 270 days of that. I think the consensus is let's just, secure this now. A couple of members talked about ensuring that no funding that's appropriated now would be spent until we're actually at that feasibility study phase. So it's the Warrant Committee's recommendation, but I put in track changes just to reflect the conversation on select board last night, which is this red here, that provided that no funds be expended until the town and MSBA execute the feasibility study agreement, which would occur after eligibility period and before we engage in that feasibility study phase. So hopefully I didn't confuse anybody on the process, but that is what we're embarking on. And this is the appropriation request that's going to the February town meeting.
So 2 questions to start. You said that if we appropriate the full amount, we would get 45% back in reimbursement for the feasibility study. But is that only if we were to get the grant, or is that just everybody gets it back? So we're not the only ones.
Correct.
They've invited us in. So everybody that does the feasibility study gets the money back, or only if you ultimately get an award?
No, so I think every community that's invited into the MSBA program that enters into a feasibility study agreement and completes their feasibility study, you'll get reimbursed for your feasibility study expenses.
Okay, so
if
that
you
part
go
is-
to voters and the vote fails,
Yep.
the MSBA will say, sorry, your vote failed, let's close out the project, here's your final reimbursement,
Okay.
see you later.
We would be guaranteed, if we do the feasibility study, to get that money back.
Yes, and I'll
The
just,
45%. Okay.
on eligible expenses, but
Right, okay. And then my second question was, can you please explain the overlap between this, what you're talking about, and what we've done already for this school project? This is the same thing. This might be the same thing. This might be a different thing. The studies that we've already done, sort of what is the interaction between those two things?
So more information is always good.
Okay.
So there's, people have better information about what a middle school grade 7, 8 with a pre-K could look like. We have, rough schematic designs of that. There's been some wetlands work. There's been some surveying work. So all that work will feed into this, but we'll likely be in a position of redoing some work because we could have a new owner's project manager. We could have a new architect. And the MSBA is going to require us to go back to square one. We're looking at a K-5 building. I think, as folks know, is the direction that the school building committee and the school committee has gone has been a grade 7, 8 building. But we applied for an elementary school. The MSBA is saying you're studying in elementary school. So there's work that's done that'll be helpful, that'll add to our level of knowledge now. But we're going back to the starting point in terms of all of that design work.
And then if we were ultimately selected to get the grant to be able to build this school or make those changes to Cunningham or build the other school or all of it or some portion of it, how much percentage of that would we see the grant, or what amount of money are we expecting?
Sure. Our current reimbursement rate is about 45%. It changes each year, so just kind of use that as a round number for now. If you do certain things in your design, you can get additional incentive points. Like if it's a green building, you can get 2 more points. So the ultimate reimbursement rate could be slightly higher. And then depending on how the reimbursement rate formula works, year to year, it could adjust on its own as well. Again, it's MSBA will reimburse us for eligible costs. So when it comes to construction, it won't, if it's for round numbers, if it's just for round numbers, if it's a $100 million school, we're not going to get $45 million. We're going to get 45% of the eligible cost of the $100 million. So it's generally a much lower percentage of the total project budget. Their requirements, they limit their reimbursement to, I think it's like $575 per square foot of construction. So if your construction cost per square foot is higher than that, which every public construction project is, you're not going to get all of it reimbursed at that percentage. There's caps on site work. There's caps on design fees that they'll cover. Then there's spaces within the building that they might say, yeah, you want that space, but we don't view that space as critical to your educational program. So you can build it, but you're paying for the design, you're paying for the construction of it on your own. So we're going to exclude 5,000 square feet from our calculations when we're reimbursing you. So there's different things that go into it, but ultimately it starts at that 45%-ish and then works down once the eligible costs are worked out.
So just for clarity for the people watching at home, so the current plan that we had been seeing, I forget how much money that they said that it might cost for the 7 to 8, but use your figure of
I used 100 million. The project that's been out there is 173-ish, 170.
Okay. I'm going to round up to 200. Say it's 200,
Yep.
okay, even though it's not. Or say 100, I don't care, just for round numbers. So that money would be unreimbursed by anybody. We would have to pay that as the town. But here, we'd be getting 45% of the reimbursed costs of whatever we wound up doing.
That's right.
So if it's just improvements to Cunningham, I don't know, putting another floor on, if it's improvements to Cunningham, if it's building a new K through 5, if it's building a new 7 and 8, whatever it would be, that would be money that we're getting from the state that we don't have to pay back.
That's right.
Okay, thank you. That's
Feasibility studies, figuring out where to be built, how architectural stuff.
Right.
That previously, weren't they asking for like, was it $4 million like 2 months ago?
Yes,
And that's gone, that never happened.
correct.
So this is a whole new.
Yeah, and the intention behind that was before we go to voters with the non-MSBA project, let's do a lot more design work so we can really nail down that cost and really nail, and get things moving. Like with the fire station projects, the town appropriated $2.7 million for design for those before the town appropriated the full construction cost for the fire stations. So in this case, we'll do the $1.5 million for the feasibility study, get to a schematic design stage with cost estimates that will have escalation out for another year or two before construction would commence. That is the number that the grant from the MSBA is based on, and it's the number that voters would be voting on at the ballot and the town meeting members will be voting on at town meeting.
Okay. And we get the 1.5 back no matter what we do. If we don't do it,
Correct.
we get back. We do it.
As long as we complete the feasibility study. If we're unsuccessful at the ballot, you're unsuccessful, you get your reimbursed share of whatever your feasibility study costs were, and the project is closed out. And that happened to me when I was in Bedfield. It's not lost at town meeting and lost at the ballot. And then, ironically, Medfield was invited in alongside Milton in December. So that was in 2021. So it took them a failed vote 3 more years to get back in to start the process all over again. So a lot hinges on that vote at town meeting and at the ballot.
Liz?
All right, now I have another question. I'm just thinking about timing again. So you said that if the town meeting were to vote on this in town meeting coming up, then we would do a feasibility study. That would take how long? That portion of the process.
So we're trying to get this in place now. Eligibility period is the first very preliminary phase. That starts May 1st
Right.
with the MSBA. We have 270 days to complete that, all of it. And then our feasibility study will commence at some point once we're through eligibility period. And that feasibility study will take 2 years, 2.5 years.
Okay.
I have a couple of, I don't know if it would be helpful, I have a couple of examples.
So we have to get everything all lined up to be able to do the feasibility
Correct.
study by the 270 days after May 1st.
Yes,
Then
that
the
is correct.
study itself would take 2 to 3 years. Then how long does it take the MSBA to decide what school, what projects they're going to find? I'm just trying to get an overall sense of the timeline.
Those, that moves pretty, so like they map out their schedule with us. So they'll say, in order to get to an MSBA board of directors to get our approval for schematic design, here are the dates that you need to meet by. The architect team, the design team will know that, and they'll work to get there. So, sorry, I'll just pull this up. So Canton's example, so they started feasibility study in October 2022. They got to MSBA approval of their design August of 2024. So almost 2 years. And then it took them another 4 months to get their special town meeting and their special election vote.
And then to build it would take an additional.
Yeah, now they're gonna dive into building out the final design. So they have to get to 100%
Year.
construction documents. So that might take another 9 months
Okay.
before a shovel goes in the ground.
My point is that before, when we were talking about it, we had mentioned the fact that there could be the override and the debt exclusion, bam, bam, same time.
Correct.
This would be individual Milton people are not paying for anything until, well, I mean, I guess the 55% of the feasibility study.
Right, but not the big money.
The big money until when? When they build it or somewhere down the road? I guess.
I would say the vote will happen 2 to 3 years, and then we'll start to borrow and bring in the money thereafter to fund the design, which is expensive, and then construction will start in earnest like a year after that point.
Okay, but still there would be some.
There's going to be a
for
significant
people to-
lag before
okay.
it shows up in taxpayers' tax bills.
Jay.
I'm also trying to process the order of things. So before this happened, we had an architect, we had a floor plan, we had drawings. They moved the process pretty far before going to taxpayers to ask for the whole shebang.
Mhm.
Under this proposed process, the future is unpredictable, but is the idea that this 1.5 million is all we're going to be asking for until we get to the point that we ask the voters for everything?
That is correct.
So is it also that, whereas previously we had full architectural drawings, or as far as me, a non-expert, can tell, full architectural drawings, etc., before going to the voters, on this proposal, we'll just have a feasibility study before we go to the voters?
No, the schematic design report, which is like the final part of the feasibility study, will be similar to what has been produced to date by Arrow Street for the former project. It'll be, you'll see renderings, you'll see renderings interior, exterior, you'll know exactly the square footage as currently designed. So it'll be very specific, very similar to what we have today from Arrow Street. I would just add there'll be even more information. Like they didn't do huge geotechnical, they didn't do traffic studies yet as part of that project. That was all the things that I think the school building committee through Shauna Work were intending to ask for money to do. That will be wrapped up as part of this feasibility study.
Great. Great, thank you.
Because as always with any of these projects, the more reports and studies you can do now, the better you'll be able to understand your site and nail down that cost estimate better.
Anybody have any additional questions or comments for Mr. Milano, just in regards to this article, the last?
The only other one on my list that I can show, and just as a heads up, so I think I printed it for you. This is the zoning map one that had the images of the, did I have that? Okay.
Yeah.
It did. All right.
Sorry, maybe.
So this is more of a housekeeping article that the planning board has submitted. There's been some court decisions that say if you have an overlay district that was approved in your zoning bylaws, but you didn't amend your zoning map to include the overlay district doesn't exist until you amend your zoning map. So we have 2 overlay districts that would meet that definition. This is a zoning article just to say those overlays, remember we passed them a few years ago, well, now they're part of our zoning map. It's the one in Milton Village, the Milton Village Planned Unit Development overlay district, and then there's a very small overlay district down at Brook and Thatcher. It covers 2 parcels. That's from several years ago now. So it's a zoning map update to say those overlays are in our bylaws and they're on our map, just to kind of close the loop on both of those. The planning board's other articles, site plan review, amendment, and accessory dwelling units, they continue to work on. Site plan review is more complete than the other one. As soon as we have, or the planning board has something worth sharing, I'm sure they'll distribute that. I don't have anything this evening, I had sent out to the chair a lot of information about ADUs. So the state's put out good information about it. Accessory dwelling units will be legal in Milton and in Massachusetts in single family districts in February. So the zoning bylaw would put greater parameters on accessory dwelling units. I'll just note that the state is really trying to narrow what cities and towns can regulate around accessory dwelling units. And the bottom line really is however you treat a single family home is how they want you to treat an ADU. Don't treat an accessory dwelling unit that would be located on a single family parcel any different than you would the single family home, is like the general guidance they've been giving. There's draft regulations. It's only 6 pages, worth reading through, and then their webinars go into deeper detail about it. And the planning board's been talking a bit about it, and I know they're meeting not next week, but the week after to discuss it a little bit more.
So, Ms. Milano, so beyond this warrant that you went over with us tonight, can you just tell us what potentially we may be looking at, if you know, for a town meeting in terms of a warrant?
Sure.
And all?
Yeah. So it's everything listed here with the ADU bylaw and the site plan review bylaw to come. And then last night, one of the select board members has been working on a potential bylaw related to outdoor lighting. So that's something that's still kind of in the works. There's been drafts circulated, town council is taking a look at. The select board hasn't discussed really in earnest yet. Our next meeting, is not, is until January 28th, I think. No, that date's not right. Is that right? Yeah, January 28th. No, that's a Tuesday night. So January 28th is our next meeting. The warrant needs to go to print pretty much that week. So some of the logistics of whether the warrant committee will be able to have a recommendation printed in the warrant ready will be a little tricky. I'll just note accessory dwelling units is time sensitive. Accessory dwelling units will be legal statewide February 6th, I think is the date, maybe February 2nd. February 2nd. So if there's an interest in having a little bit more kind of regulation and guidance in place, then town meeting would need to act on the 24th of February. And I think that's really it for that's it, but that's the special town meeting part.
That's what you have for us. And I appreciate it, Ms. Milano.
Sure.
Also on the agenda, just to swiftly move to another topic, I have fiscal year 26 budget. I know we kind of want to do one thing at a time, and we have the special town meeting. I kind of just included that in case those who are doing work on your, what we like to call warrant committee, subcommittee stuff, if you had any questions for Mr. Milano in regards to anything that perhaps is in this special town meeting warrant that may affect the 26 budget in the spring, or just any general questions that you may have for him that he could answer now, or maybe just give you the information on. So it's more of a little bit of an open-ended agenda topic, Mr. Milano?
Any more on the contract negotiations?
Nope, nothing new.
Phillies.
Yeah. No. We haven't really
Conclusions.
commenced with anybody, no.
I don't really want to talk about it, but
But we will.
I'm going to, because you brought up the budget. Do you appropriate in advance a certain amount of money for legal fees, or does that come up as it comes up? And from where is that appropriated?
There is a legal budget. I think it's under general government, perhaps.
Okay.
In the warrant, I think it's usually right after the select board budget. So we have our base services are covered under the retainer with Murphy, Hesse, Toomey, and Lehane. That covers
That's what I'm
kind of
talking about. Okay.
day-to-day stuff. And then, so there's, I think, only really two line items in that. There's the retainer line item, and then there's a professional services, I think is the terminology we use, and that's $280,000 maybe. And that's for our month-to-month expenses covered by our, labor council, which is Murphy, Hesse, Toomey, Lehane, and another firm. MHTL provides the town council services, so we'll get billed hourly by Peter Mello for things that require much more work. For example, we're at the appellate tax board arguing with Winter Valley and Unquity as to whether there should be nonprofit or charitable exemptions or not. So he'll bill us hourly for that and amount of work. Labor Council again. We have a firm assisting us with our 40B projects that are going through. So that's that line item for general legal services that isn't specific.
I'm just mindful of the amount of money that we recently spent on legal services as we go forward.
Yep.
I'm just trying to get a sense of if we anticipate what that amount will be and where that would be included.
So everything related to the MBTA communities work to date
Right.
through the oral arguments was covered under a fixed fee agreement with special counsel, which was Goodwin Proctor through attorney Kevin Martin.
Right, but now that's over. So.
Those costs were, encumbered and from prior year funds. It was a contract, so it didn't affect fiscal 25's
Right.
legal budget. What that means for future legal expenses related to MBTA communities, and the decision came out today, I don't have an answer yet.
I'm just interested in
Sure.
that amount of money as we kind of go forward in that process.
Yep.
What the amount of money that we think we're going to incur in legal fees might be.
Yes, I don't.
Okay.
Yep. The board hasn't discussed it in terms of any steps or not steps that will be taken or not. In fiscal 26, we'll expect to be in negotiations, which can be expensive from a labor council
Sure,
perspective, depending on how those go. But otherwise, we expect a fairly normal year in terms of legal expenses.
Okay. Perfect.
Anything else, Jay?
I don't think so. So Mr. Chair, can you remind us where we stand? Do we have budgets for all the departments?
I believe everything's in
Yeah.
the folder.
I'll send it along.
Okay.
We'll double check, but I believe everything's been dropped in there. And if anything's missing, let me know.
Drop in the warrant box, right?
Yes,
Okay.
the shared folder that we sent out.
Mr. Milano, I really appreciate
of course.
The time. I'm sure we'll be in touch.
Yep.
But
Sounds
thank
good.
you again for everything.
Yep. No, of course. And like I said, on the lead service line inventory ones, if you have more deeper questions or want to talk about those in better detail, that would be Marina Fernandez. I'll be able to handle pretty much all the other ones except for the planning board ones. So if there's follow-up conversations or information, feel free to reach out to me, yourself or anybody on the committee. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Have a nice evening.
Good. So I will take off. All right. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
See ya.
Now, we have number 4 on our agenda. I'm mindful of the time, and I'm mindful of agenda number 5, which is future scheduling, and where we'll be, I think, spending a lot more time together in the upcoming weeks. Not to delay or belabor, but I just wanted to have a very brief discussion with everybody, just about some of these matters that Mr. Milano spoke to us about. And then obviously like what the future weeks hold. I think the first question I have as a chair is just surrounding the lead pipe matters. Would we like to hear from the town engineer, Ms. Fernandez?
I do.
As to that,
Yeah,
Sure.
I do.
anybody else? Well, would any?
Yeah, that would be great.
Yeah,
I
that'd be a good
Okay.
idea. Sure.
I'd be interested in them trying to coordinate it with, like they're replacing the gas lines in the
Yeah.
neighborhood. Like,
Sure.
it'd be a great thing to do at the same time, so sit down there.
That's a novel idea.
Yeah, I don't, as it was mentioned, I think it might be a good idea just to hear from her. I think also, obviously for the public who surprisingly really watch these meetings, can just get some more information and help town meeting members. So I can arrange to have Ms. Fernandez come in. I'll work with Nick and the department to see if she can come down, pick a good date. We're kind of crunched for time, but I don't expect that to be too long. Probably answer some good questions for us. So we can do that. That's not a problem. And does anybody else have anything in terms of the other articles that we've reviewed? Would we like to hear from anyone else?
What would
I just want to set this forward so we can have good discussions on every article. Hear from everybody we think have all the information marshaled to have a good discussion and then be able to draft a comment.
I do have a thing. You know what, on the school building thing, I would like to see, because we brought that up when they were here, I went back to my notes. They were gonna get back to us with population numbers and stuff, I think, number of classrooms. But I'd like to get some proof or justification of the need of this. Like number of classrooms, because I know they got 4 more classrooms from Cunningham, what's going on with that? How many do they need it, is the question. Prove it.
So this is I'll just meld this into two. So in terms of the future, I'm expecting the school, and we'll be posting tomorrow. Schools and school building will begin on Monday.
I'm sorry, I didn't really understand what you just
Oh
said.
no, schools and school building will be in here Monday.
Oh, okay.
I'm going to be posting tomorrow
Oh,
for a
that's
meeting
fine.
on Monday.
Yeah, okay.
So
I just didn't really hear you.
I'm sorry. So I would suggest if there are specifics that were asked at the last meeting when we were upstairs that haven't been fulfilled, let's follow up on them.
I got notes.
And I know that Sean O'Rourke would be probably the main person to, at least for some of those numbers, probably reach out to.
Sorry to interrupt. Can we get any requests like that in writing, just so that?
How's that?
Getting any requests like that in writing, we're going to be asking Sean O'Rourke. Maybe we asked him 2 months ago, but he's forgotten, and we've forgotten. So
Oh yeah, no, I'm not saying
Yeah,
that's
that's a good idea. I'd like to see it, thank you.
To email it to him.
Yeah, that's what I
Yeah.
meant. I'm not announcing.
okay.
I know Sean is a very busy person.
Sure.
So, but yeah, that's what I meant. Follow up,
Yeah.
and just as a reminder, the question will come up again, and then we'll be back the same situation without it. So, I just asked, just follow up with Sean if there's problems. We can, I'm sure, reach him.
I'm confused about the planning board. So if they're having their next meeting on the 28th,
That's the select board.
I'm so sorry. When is
Sorry.
the planning board's next meeting?
It's a quiz.
The 23rd?
Yeah, the 26th.
Yeah, it was. So if Nick said that the warrant needs to go to print pretty much that week, that's when they're gonna have the warrant articles for the ADU bylaw, the site plan, and then maybe for the outdoor lighting. Are we gonna have time to talk about it? But 2, are we gonna have time to have them come in and answer any questions about that?
Yeah. So, welcome to the Warrant Committee. And
Hey,
I meant I'm trying to be.
okay.
That's not.
They're working very hard
No,
over
of
there. I
course-
don't blame
of
them.
course they
I'm
are.
not trying to cast
And I
aspersions.
think
okay.
it's kind of like in terms of our committee. The way this is landing from
Yeah.
holidays and the New
Yeah,
Year's,
that's
and it's a huge thing. As when the chair of the planning board came in, I don't like this, in terms of practice, but as, Mr. Milano said, it may be the situation where we are actively hearing from them prior, maybe at the time the warrant must be submitted for print, and we continue to meet, and then we do our comment that is not contained in the warrant that goes to the town meeting, and we green sheet it at the meeting, where we would essentially deliver the comment to town meeting then. That does not happen. Hasn't happened in my experience. I can't remember it happening in the last few years, but it would just simply say, at the time of the drafting of the warrant, the warrant committee is not able to submit, and we'll just have
for
sheets.
that school.
The library.
But there was a recommendation, but then there was a green sheet for that.
Yeah.
So it's not totally
And I don't know if it'd be a
without
green
precedent.
sheet.
But
This might be like a yellow sheet or something.
yeah, it
but
was
whatever.
not
But
without precedent to happen. But
this would say, it was not available at the time of printing.
okay.
So then we would just, town meeting would walk in and they'll just peel the sheet off with our comment. And then obviously either read it to them or answer any questions in regards to what we have to say. But there's usually a hard deadline on the print to send these out to print, and obviously it's the best practice to have all the comments in. So everything goes at once and the town has all the information at the same time.
Even if they haven't written it, is it possible to have them say, this is what we anticipate it looking more specifically than, I really appreciated when Meredith came in and kind of previewed some of this. But now that it's been a few months, maybe there's more specifics. Is there a possibility of having someone from the planning board coming in even before they have that written so that, we have time to digest a little bit? I just really would like, when we go into town meeting, the town meeting knows the warrant committee looked at this, great, here's my piece of paper, now I know what to do. Whether you agree with me or not, that's fine, but.
Oh yeah, we will have a comment for them. I think it was the anticipation.
No, that's not my question. I just meant, is it possible to have Meredith or someone else from the planning board come in again, even if it's before they make their final writing of the warrant article?
Oh, most certainly. I think it was my anticipation, and I was going to address this, speaking to the planning board and seeing what they have together.
Great.
I'd like to have something like a draft or something that we can actually speak to, as opposed to them turning around and saying, oh, well, we changed some things or we removed some things. So I'll have a conversation with the chair and see kind of where they're at. And then I'll kind of speak to Mr. Milano and we'll adjust as necessary. But I agree with you. I mean, we got really an executive summary.
Yeah, and I'm not, again, not casting aspersions because I know that they have a lot going on over there, but just, if we could work with them, I would appreciate that on that. So thank you.
Sure, and I'll have more information for us on Monday in regards to the planning board. Jay?
Yeah, I want to second that, and especially, I'm especially concerned about the site review article because I've been listening to their discussions of it, and the more I listen, the more I realize I don't know what a site review is. I don't know, is it required? Is it binding? The more I learn, the more I realize I don't know what a site review is. And what I'm sort of picking up on is I'm a little nervous if they come up in front of us and say, don't worry about a site review is our old regulations are bad and these are better. Like, if that's what they say, then I think we'll want to have a skeptical eye, I guess. So I'm going to need a lot of education about what a site review is, what you're doing different, why you're doing it different.
Okay, I appreciate that.
Not the nitty gritty that they get into, but big picture, why are you doing this?
Okay. Very fair.
Julia's
Julia.
Hi, I just wanted to raise again, and maybe it's something for the agenda on Monday, but what the process is going to be of writing the comments as a committee and reviewing them and agreeing upon them as a committee which will hopefully be a departure from how it was done last year.
Yeah, we can put that on the agenda. I have lots of ideas.
Great, thanks.
Thank you, Julia. Yeah, Jay?
While we're talking housekeeping, how are we doing on minutes?
Doing pretty well on minutes. We got some new minutes today, and we have some others.
Cool.
Between now and Monday, I'm going to circulate the new ones, and I think we have some others that have not been approved that we've reviewed.
The drafts of all minutes through October 30th have been submitted and so I owe you now tonight and November 13th. But I'm not sure what have been deemed ready to circulate.
Okay, we'll get on that. I can't anticipate having that on the Monday agenda, Jay. But I'm mindful of it, and we'll work through it. I like to get them completed before the special town meeting. A lot of writing and reviewing to do. Does anybody else have any questions, concerns, comments? Okay. So, understanding that we'll be, unless there's a major issue, we'll be meeting back here on Monday to discuss schools.
And then what are you thinking thereafter?
And then maybe, the thing is, Monday I'd like to keep just schools because I think it's going to take a while to get through. But I'll have information regarding the planning board for you, and maybe when we can get that in. I would very likely to see a Wednesday meeting also. In addition, maybe a Thursday, I don't know, based upon what I'm told by the planning board and others. But I would say that after this week, we'll probably be meeting more than twice, 3, and then the last week, maybe 4. The comment drafting can be done at home. I'd like to, I'm not going to speak to this now, but like I said, we can address it at the next meeting. Just how we do that, how that's done. Some of the more experienced people, I think, can help out with the newer people. It's kind of an onerous task. You know, when you look at it, being a first year member, you know, how do you do this? What's the expectations? But we can talk about that in terms of future scheduling.
And then it's debated, like how it goes.
Yeah, what we did, we will, like I said, this is under, because it falls under our future, we will, debate, have a robust discussion, all the members involved, and then we put it to a vote. So I would like, I think for some of these we've looked at tonight, we could probably vote on in the near future. But there are others like the ADU schools and stuff that I think are going to take a little longer discussion, a little more thought. And obviously the comments, especially as to the planning articles, are probably going to be a little bit longer than some of these here that we talked about tonight, but it's really.
The thing about scheduling, keep in mind, there's a federal holiday a couple of Mondays from now.
Okay. Well, if there's nothing else, anything from anyone on Zoom? Oh, okay. Do I have do I hear a motion?
I make a motion to adjourn.
Second?
Yes, second.
Thank you. The meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you. Meeting's adjourned.
We adjourn.